You seem so grown up, like you just seem so
Please ensure that you've muted your mics, please. Thank you.
All these nice people.
Say hi to Councillor Hillier.
Steve Hillier, how you doing?
I think he might only be.
You're on mute, buddy. Are you falling over dying? Don't do that. That's really
no. I'm just showing you the quiet room sign behind me. I'm turning into a counselor. Well, it's this or disturb the people in the ward, so this is a lot easier.
We are.
Well,
streaming.
I just want you to know the news of
We
your
are
demise
streaming.
has been greatly exaggerated.
Just so you're aware, we are
we're on
streaming.
live, are we not?
Thank
Claire?
you. You might wish to mute.
Got it.
Thank you.
Okay, we have quorum, so it's 4:06. We're a little bit late. Welcome to the 12th meeting of the Planning and Environment Committee. We have two counselors in attendance, myself and Councillor Hopkins, and we have Councillor Turner and the mayor virtually. Deputy Mayor Helmer will not be joining us tonight as he's welcoming home the newest member of his family, Flora Beatrix, which is lovely. So congratulations to the Graham Helmer family. And with that, I will call the meeting to order. And I will begin by saying that the City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. To make a request specific to this meeting, please contact pec@london.ca. With that, I will look to committee for disclosures of conflict. And welcome Councillor Kabaga as well. I'm not seeing any conflicts being disclosed, so I will move to the consent items. We have a number of consent items. Would any member like any item pulled? I'm not seeing any hands going up in the air. So I need a motion for the entire stack of consent items on the floor. Moved by the mayor, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. Any comments or questions on those items? Councillor Turner, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think with respect to 2.5, the Argyle area regeneration study, and 2.6, the projected major transit area information report, the major transit area information report is fairly significant. It's a strong report. It's being asked of us to make any comments and move it forward for public comment and circulation. I think that might warrant perhaps a staff overview, just to kind of give some context for the public as well. But before I move there, just to the Argyle area regeneration study, I think Councillor Lewis is here to speak to that. So looking forward to the comments. Great to see information that kind of profiles the demographics and situation in the Argyle area. I did have a couple of questions and perhaps some help in interpreting through some of this. One of them talks about it talks about how Argyle hasn't developed at the same rate as the rest of the city, and I'm not sure if that's a fair comparison to make, as the Argyle is predominantly an interior neighborhood. It's within the built area boundary. It's not an area where greenfield development occurs, and so the predominant amounts of greenfield development are going to be occurring on the city's periphery. We don't really have any development that happens east of Veterans Memorial Parkway, but Argyle is defined as being eastern limited by the Veterans Memorial Parkway. So perhaps staff could comment on whether that's a fair assessment to say that the investment in growth within Argyle could be compared to the city on the whole, when you most obviously see that growth in fairly significant measures in the greenfield and boundary areas of the city. That's for you, staff, if I may.
Okay, I guess I'll go to Ms. O'Hagan or Mr. Barrett on that.
Sure. Hi, it's Britt O'Hagan here. I'll try to address the question, and I'll see Mr. Barrett can jump in as well. So what we did use for this study and to develop the community profile is the building permit information. And I do agree with your point, Councillor Turner, that there is a lot of new development that is going on in the greenfield area of the city. More of an observational point to this area is that there isn't a whole lot of redevelopment happening in some of the lower rise areas, which we do see in some other mature neighborhoods But it is a fair point that there is a lot more building permits being issued in greenfield situations.
Thank you, Ms. O'Hagan. And so that's helpful. I'm not sure if there's a metric that we can use to keep track and to watch to say, okay, this is an established neighborhood, and this is what the benchmark might be that we'd expect to either exceed or match, or is it performing less than those established neighborhood areas. I think it's a hard metric to compare, and so I recognize the challenges with it, but I just wanted to raise that because I wasn't sure if that was a fair statement to say that Argyle wasn't developing or the investment wasn't being forthcoming to Argyle as using that metric, because I'm not sure if that's the right one. The second is there's a bit of a paradox in there when it talks about the community members' comments and looking for investment and looking for development within the community and those opportunities there. And then it talks a little bit about the upcoming redevelopment of the regional mental health centers lands, and that they're apprehensive of the impacts that's going to have on the commercial districts, it's going to have in terms of traffic volumes, and the impacts that it might have just in general about adding more density within the neighborhoods. I'm not sure what the course of the conversation was. I tried to glean that from the report, but where does that I guess that rub come from between a desire for more development and investment and a concern about the impacts of that development and investment that are where it's most likely to occur at the RMHC lands? That's for you, just have, Madam Chair.
So through the chair, I will say that there are certain areas that have been developing in this area. Where the request came to do this study was from the BIA. So we have a bit of different types of community stakeholders here, one being the business community that would be obviously concerned with additional commercial land and moving some of that demand from the Dundas Street corridor. There is also the desire for or different pockets that would have residential development, and we're very early on in the stages for the psychiatric hospital lands, just having seen that the property was sold. So it will be challenging, and it's something that we'll look at, and maybe it's a matter of kind of sectioning out any future reports on this into more district kind of sub areas and sub districts that are all really experiencing different types of challenges and different types of opportunities as well. And just to your first question again, just to loop back quickly, one thing that we will look at doing to have a better comparison to the city as a whole, we can look at pulling just the permits for built area within the built area boundary and seeing if that influences and impacts the numbers a bit more. So comparing the Argyle area to other built up areas as well.
Great, thank you very much.
So before I go further, Councillor, you had expressed a desire to hear a more of a fulsome introduction on item 2.6 from staff. So I'm thinking perhaps it might be cleaner if we pull that out of the consent items and then deal with all the consent items and then move to that afterwards. Does that sound good to you, Councillor Turner?
Yep, fair enough.
So I'll look to the mover and seconder, Mr. Mayor and Councillor Hopkins. If it's okay if we go, your motion is all of the consent items except for item 2.6.
If the intention is that we want to deal with it separately for voting purposes, I understand the logic. And if that's it, I certainly support that. If not, certainly questions can be asked regardless.
Absolutely, Mr. Mayor. It's just that the councillor wants a bit of a presentation from staff. I just
So yeah, that's
okay.
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, great. Councillor Hopkins, good. So the motion for clerks is all of the consent items except for item 2.6, which will be handled separately. And with that, I'm going to Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm trying some new technology today, so if I disconnect or go black, it's my my new technology that I'm learning how to utilize here for these Zoom meetings. I first of all want to thank staff and particularly Mr. DeCuster, who put in a lot of time on the Argyle regeneration study, and that's why I'm joining you today to speak a little bit to that. Hopefully I can maybe provide a little bit of enlightenment on a couple of Councillor Turner's quite correctly highlighted contradictions in the report. Certainly there are lands in the Argyle regeneration study area that are not being redeveloped and there's both. There's some residential areas, there's some brownfields from old industry. So we do have some gaps in the teeth in regard to the Smile and Argyle. And the thing is that they've been long-standing gaps. So there's a real desire to see a focus on helping fill those gaps in. With regard to the psych hospital lands, one of the concerns that I heard, and I think staff captured it in the report up to a little bit of an extent, because certainly staff came out and did some constituent feedback at one of the ward meetings I hosted before COVID prevented us from having ward meetings anymore. But there's a concern that the development of those old psychiatric hospital lands not be out-facing and not direct all of the development towards Oxford and Highbury, but that it's developed in a way that is inclusive of the Argyle community and looks inward towards that block of the planning area rather than outward towards other sections, and in particular up toward Northland Mall and Fanshawe College. And so that's where you're going to get a little bit of a contradiction. People are apprehensive about it. They're excited about the possibilities, but they're also concerned that it may actually siphon away from the area rather than enhance the area. So it's a little bit of a challenging act. And of course, there are some people with different opinions on the matter too. Some who would like to see it just totally turn into green space and soccer fields, and obviously that's not going to happen. And there are others who are looking forward to the residential infill and new commercial opportunities. So how those things come together, and in particular how they connect as well with our transit service, both with the East London Link that will run up Highbury, but as well as the express buses out on Dundas that will bring people to the Argyle Mall area and enhance the demographics that are going to support the continued commercial existence in the area. I think it's very important too to say thank you to all of you, my fellow councillors. The report highlighted some of the public investments that have been made in the area, and I just want to say thank you for supporting a number of those initiatives that were brought forward in this term of council. A couple of them are initiatives that started in the last term of council, but I know you supported them as well there, for those of you who are returning. There's a real opportunity for us out in the Argyle area, and there is some undeveloped green space available as well, particularly along or near Veterans Memorial. They're not huge parcels of land, but there is opportunity there. The report noted that Zarin is well underway now with its construction of a new apartment building that will be geared particularly towards seniors with a significant component of affordable housing. There's a real desire for the Argyle residents to be able to age in place. But as they're getting to an age where maintaining those single family homes are really becoming a challenge for them, they want to stay in the neighborhood. They want to be able to go to the Malibu for breakfast after church on Sunday morning. They want to be able to continue to go to Adrian's, No Frills, or Coulter's Pharmacy because they know where everything is on the shelves. And that's been a challenge in this area. And I know the report indicated that that's one of the areas that residents are particularly interested in. I think we've got a long way to go on this. It's a preliminary study, but there's lots of exciting things happening here. I just want to thank both staff and my council colleagues for their support in bringing some renewed life back to the Argyle area.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Councillor Hopkins.
Madam Chair, I was going to speak to the item that we just pulled, so I'll wait until that comes forward.
Great, thank you. Councillor Pelosa, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My questions are going to be in relation to item 2.1 on the consent agenda through you to the appropriate staff. Questioning in regards to item within it, point number 56, located on page 16. As the developer is slated to install a fence for the neighboring residents, which I know will be appreciated, Wondering, once the city assumes that subdivision, what conditions come with the fence? I've had other neighborhoods that have had problems with the fence later, and then it's the question of who's responsible for it after the city assumes it.
I believe that's Mr. Maxula. Or Mr. Barrett.
Madam Chair, it's Matt Felberg speaking.
Hi,
So if it's a board-on-board privacy fencing, if it's if it's on one of the single-family lots, it would be the responsibility of that homeowner. Forgive me, I don't know if it's related to a condominium. If it were a condominium, it would then be a common element that they would be responsible to manage and maintain. So I can look into that a little bit more and try and get back to the councillor before the end of the meeting.
Thanks.
Thank you, that'd be appreciated. My next question is in regards to item within that 46. This is White Oaks is a very busy road. Staff recently helped to lower the speed limit on the road. Many residents have problems getting in and out of the subdivision already, and that's in advance of all these additional homes being added to it. White Oaks Road is also a major cycling corridor exiting the city into the countryside, which is heavily used as residents park at Earl Nichols Arena and then cycle down this way. Are we doing anything, or is the developer slated to do anything in regards to the cycling infrastructure for right turn lanes in? Currently, the turning lane is very short and the cycling lane is actually majorly used as a turning lane.
Is that you too, Mr. Feldberg?
Yeah, I'll take that one, Madam Chair, and through you. So if we're also going to rely on Mr. Dales actually for any future plans for White Oak Road, but in the short term, we'd be looking to create, there isn't anything particular related to active transportation, so cycling lanes as part of a turn lane, but we would be bringing it up to current city standards as part of the development.
Thank you. Councillor Pelosa, anything else?
Yeah, just one question, as I'm just, I enjoy your committee, though learning as well as I go. In regards to item 6I, just the automatic flusher. I assume this is an automatic sanitation hydrant flusher system to be on Petty Road. Wondering if that one is actually what this report's referring to. Secondly, if it's going to be city property when it's removed, and what's involved in the removal of it. Is it going to disturb the road or sod that's just been installed? Just looking to see how that process works.
Mr. Feldberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to the Councillor Pelosa. So it's actually a piece of infrastructure that our water services require in order to maintain water quality in the subdivision, so that we have safe drinking water. So at a certain point, once the developer has established that they can get appropriate turnover and maintain a chlorine residual, they can actually have that removed. Part of the funds are there in order to secure against that removal in the future. But the removal of the flusher would not be done until, before we have top coat of asphalt. So it would be at the base course of asphalt when it was removed. So we would have a high level of service. We'd have the final coat of asphalt installed after the flusher is removed.
Okay, thank you for that, and for receiving my questions, Madam Chair. That's all of them.
Thanks, Councillor. I look to committee or any visiting members. That's my list. Is there anyone else that has comments or questions on the consent items? Councillor Turner.
Madam Chair, just really quickly with the respect to the strategic plan variance report. If I could just get a bit of comment on the urban design guidelines. That's a fairly significant delay on a pretty major piece of policy. I recognize that a lot of stuff have been going on in our current context. Some of the delays are pushed back to the end of the year, but this one's into the spring of next year. So, so if I might through you to staff, just for a bit of an expansion on what is presenting challenges to delivering on that one.
Okay, would that be you, Mr. Barrett?
I can speak to it quickly, and Ms. O'Hagan might be able to jump in, but this one is primarily a staffing issue, and the person who's been responsible for that is actually just left on a parental leave, and so she will be away from us for some time, and when we're going to hopefully pick this up and get it completed early in the new year.
Councillor?
Yep, thank you.
Okay, any other comments or questions? I'm seeing none. We have motion on the floor for all of the consent items except for 2.6, and I will call the question. Councillor Hopkins?
Yes.
Councillor Turner?
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga?
Yes.
Mayor Holder?
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Great, that takes us to item 2.6, and Councillor Turner was looking for, I know we can't do presentations in this format, unfortunately, but a little bit more of an in-depth introduction from city staff. I guess that would be Mr. Adamo or Mr. Barrett, if one of you would like to give some commentary on item 2.6, the Protected Major Transit Area Information Report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's Greg Barrett speaking. Joanne Lee was the author of this report, and Joanne's following along with our translation service, so hopefully I will do her justice in trying to put her report forward. As Councillor Turner noted, this is a fairly significant policy report. Protected major transit station areas are areas that came about as a result of Planning Act changes back in 2017, where it allowed municipalities to delineate these areas. And these areas are simply defined as the areas surrounding existing and planned higher order transit stations or stops. And they are areas that are intended to accommodate high levels of both pedestrian activity, of residential and employment intensity. And they're generally within 500 to 800 meters, or about a 10-minute walk from the existing or proposed higher order transit station or stop. There's a figure in your agenda, I believe it's page 91 or 92, that shows what this, it's page 92, that shows what this would look like overlaid on the place types of the London plan. As I said, this came forward actually in 2017, which was just after we had completed and approved the London plan. However, many of the policies in the London plan are actually parallel and very much consistent with what the direction is of the Protected Major Transit Station Area policies, save and except we haven't identified the minimum employment and residential densities within these areas. So in many ways, what's in front of you would parallel the existing policies, but would add these pieces about our proposed minimum intensities for both residential and employment development within these areas. We also note in this report that if council is to bring forward these amendments are not appealable. And that was, again, explicitly intended when the province changed the legislation. And that was to allow council to bring forward policies that would promote intensification and redevelopment along where council had planned for a higher order transit and not have those policies subject to appeal. The other thing that bringing these policies into play would allow, it unlocks the ability to consider or use inclusionary zoning, because subsequent changes that have been made to the Planning Act have tied inclusionary zoning to identified protected major transit station areas. So if we're to successful in bringing this forward, and we're looking at coming to you in the fall with the public participation meeting for these policies, you in fact would be bringing into force and effect policies for the downtown rapid transit corridor and transit village place types that are currently under appeal in the London plan, because in fact, these policies would replace those policies, and as I noted, are not appealable. If you've got any other sort of more technical questions, hopefully I can answer those.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Barrett. That's very helpful. And as you said, this is going to be a fairly major policy piece. Once in force and effect, does this allow us to take advantage of the inclusionary zoning opportunities right away, or do we still need other hurdles to cross? As you talked about in here, there's two different ways, and one's the development or the community planning permit system, or the transit corridors. The permit planning system is still several years away as we work through the Rethink zoning process, I'd imagine. So does this allow us to get into IZ in a much earlier time?
Mr. Barrett?
Yes, through the chair, it could, but again, the IZ needs to come forward with its whole set of policies and all your consideration under that. What the legislative change does, it allows you, if you've gone through that process, to have the IZ. This is an area where you can implement that tool. So we would still be going through that inclusionary zoning process separately on its own, and that is part of your toolkit for your affordable housing toolkit, and it's still part of our work plan. So yes, we will be doing that. But with the protected major transit station areas, and I'm really trying to be very careful and not go right to the jargon of PMSTAs, because I'm trying to speak English, that we will in fact be able to bring forward the consideration of IZ sooner.
Wonderful, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. And the last question I had with it was, is there anything within this that kind of dictates a planning horizon timeframe? Is this we can designate these corridors and areas now, and do they have to? Is it anticipatory the same way that we take a look at the urban growth boundary on a 25 or 30 year horizon in terms of land inventories? Do they designate anything like that, or is this this can be anticipatory well into 50 years or onwards?
Yeah, through the chair, this is tied more to the overall timeframe of your official plan. So the official plan is a 20-year plan. So this would follow those policies. However, like any of the policies that you have, if there were to the areas where council is considering the provision of higher order transit, then we would come forward with an amendment to follow through and designate the station areas and the station stops that might be identified along any change of a higher order transit system in the same way. But this now would run the course of your plan and has a horizon consistent with the horizon of your official plan.
Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Barrett. So that's helpful. So is that also subject to the 5-year comprehensive review, or is that it's just a 20-year from the last, well, I guess from our, sorry, I'm mumbling on that one. So does this then be subject every time we do a review on the OP, or is this pretty much in place for that 20-year horizon from when we set the London plan?
Through the chair, this is set for the horizon of your plan. Your comprehensive review can look at anything. It's not limited to urban growth boundary matters. We've done previous comprehensive reviews that didn't deal with UGB issues at all. It dispensed with those quite quickly and dealt with, for example, we brought forward in the old plan the complete rewrite of the commercial policies as part of a comprehensive review of the plan, where we went from, I believe we had 12 or 14 different commercial land use designations, and we brought that down to 6 or 7 as part of a comprehensive review. So any matter that council, that 5-year review is council's opportunity to review any or all of its official plan. It's not tied to just an urban growth boundary issue. It's any and all of your policies. And it's that provision is more to ensure that you look at your plan on a regular basis. In fact, you as a council look at your plan regularly when we bring forward, for example, reports that are in response to changing provincial legislation or new planning initiatives that might arise. And then we bring forward reports to you that would suggest or recommend policy changes to remain current with either changing legislation or changing ways that you're doing things. So you're not tied to that comprehensive review. That comprehensive review just says that you'd better do this every 5 years.
Thank you. So through you, Madam Chair. So really those windows of opportunity for retooling this as we go forward come through whether we wish to exercise that opportunity in a comprehensive review. But those tend to be the windows for revisiting this policy rather than necessarily on its own.
Again, it could be either. It could be on its own if as I said, council had another discussion decision around an expanded or modified higher order transit system, then again, we would probably follow through that discussion with this kind of thing. So not tied to a comprehensive review, but tied to another act of council.
Great, thank you very much. So I look forward to hearing the public comments as those come back as it's sent out for circulation. Thanks for all the work.
Thanks, Councillor Turner. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Barrett, for that quick presentation. I agree, Councillor Turner's concerns around the changes and the importance of these policies coming forward, and glad to know that they are working in parallel to the London plan, and I too will be looking forward to the participation meeting coming sometime in the fall to, I guess, have a better understanding of what these legislation changes will mean to the London plan. My quick question for you, I know we talked a little bit about inclusionary zoning here, but we already do that. And I just want to try to understand, are we going to be doing more through these policies? Will there be greater flexibility, or is it really endorsing what we're already doing when it comes to affordable housing? I know inclusionary zoning is one tool of other tools, but trying to have a better understanding on how the affordable housing will work with these policies, but also do you all anticipate further legislation changes coming forward? I know, or not, maybe not anticipate, but are there, is there going to be flexibility knowing what may be coming down the pipe that we are open to these changes as well?
Mr. Barrett?
Through Madam Chair, certainly I don't know what other legislative changes might be coming down the pike, but if and when any of those do come forward, we regularly report those out to you. But as it relates to the protected major transit station areas, we don't see any change on this. This, in fact, is something that has been in, as I noted, since 2017. So we're at a point now in the London Plan and the London Plan appeal process where it's appropriate to bring the London Plan up to speed, where in fact it can take advantage of these of this. I would suggest to you stronger policy, and as well, this augments what's already there. This is not a bad thing for the London Plan. It in fact augments the existing policies of the London Plan by establishing these minimum employment and residential densities for these areas.
And if I may, Madam Chair, just a quick follow-up, again, as it relates to affordable housing as well, or is it greater opportunities to do what not only the London Plan, sort of creating more flexibility in these areas when it comes to affordable housing?
Through the chairs, was noted by Councillor Turner, one of the other things that this does do is that it unlocks the opportunity for council to consider the application of inclusionary zoning. So that's part of your toolkit. And with the identification or the designation of these protected major transit station areas, we would then be able to implement or be able to use inclusionary zoning as a means of supporting and providing for affordable housing.
Anything else, Councillor? No? Are there any other comments or questions on this item? No. And I believe, Councillor Turner, was interested in moving this. I'll look for confirmation on that. Yes?
Happy to move.
And is there a second? Counselor Hopkins? It's been moved and seconded. I see no other comments or questions, no virtual blue hands in the air, so I'll call the question. Counselor Hopkins?
Yes.
Counselor Turner? Counselor Turner?
Yes.
Counselor Keabaga?
Yes.
Mayor Holder?
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
That takes us to our scheduled items. The first one is 3.1. It's a public participation meeting to remove references to the 1989 official plan from zoning bylaw Z1. So I will look for a motion to open the PPM. Moved by Counselor Keabaga, seconded by Counselor Turner. And I'll call the question on that. Counselor Hopkins?
Yes.
Counselor Turner?
Yes.
Counselor Keabaga?
Yes.
Mayor Holder?
Yes.
And I vote yes. So I will go to staff. Oh, hold on. The clerk has to report out on that vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Thank you so much. So I'll go to staff to just give us a little intro on that item.
Thank you. Through the chair. Can you all hear me?
Yes, Mr.
Okay,
McBeth.
excellent. Thank you. So just as a bit of background and context, in accordance with Section 24(1) of the Planning Act, no bylaw, including a zoning bylaw, can be passed by council unless it conforms to a city's official plan. So in other words, the zoning bylaw implements the policies of the municipality's official plan. The London Plan was adopted by council and approved by the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing in late 2016, and certain policies and maps were appealed in early 2017 to the LPAT. A series of decisions by the LPAT since then have brought the majority of the London Plan policies into force and effect as the city's new official plan. There's still appeals on certain policies and maps and site-specific appeals, and the city continues to actively work with appellants to scope the range of matters under appeal and resolve those appeals. To date, we are expecting the first phase of hearings at the LPAT to start in the middle of September, middle of next month. But noting that the majority of the London Plan is now in effect, the intention of this is to transition from the 1989 OP to the new policy framework of the London Plan, and then required changes to the implementing zoning bylaw. So the purpose and effect is to remove references to the 1989 plan, including removing references to land use designations. The term in the London Plan is place type, removing references to specific policy numbers and map schedules. The London Plan has a new city structure with various mixed-use forms of development permitted, which would be implemented by multiple zone variations rather than the structure of the 1989 plan where a zone intended to implement a particular land use designation. These technical amendments to the zoning bylaw are intended as an interim measure. They don't negate the need for the comprehensive review and update of the zoning bylaw in order to implement the London Plan. This comprehensive review is currently underway through the Rethink zoning initiative. The categories of changes are removing references to the land use designations. So for example, many of the chapters of the zoning bylaw start with a general purposes subsection where they would say things like, this zone is typically on lands designated low density residential or rural settlement or what have you. So the language is changed to, lands planned for use as or other things that don't explicitly tie it to the designation. Removal of references to other zones that implement a designation. Sometimes there are references to, in addition to this zone, there are other ones that implement that designation. A third category is removing sections, policy numbers specifically from the 89 plan for those sections where the London Plan is now in force and effect. And also removal of references to 1989 map schedules or mapped features. So a lot of the times you'll note that on the map, they would say that this map or a certain type of feature is illustrated on this particular map. We found that there's policies in both plans that would also indicate where those features are found. So the intention is that this sort of cross-reference would help with that transition once appeals are resolved. No public comments were received. This was originally started, notice was sent out in 2018, but at that point, the LPAT had not had made as many decisions, so there was not as much of the plan in effect. But now that the majority of it is in effect, we are of the opinion that it's time to make this transition. And I am happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Macbeth. I see Mr. Wallace in committee room 1/2. So I will go to Mr. Wallace.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate the committee's opportunity to speak to this particular item. And I have 4 points. Just so you know, it's Mike Wallace, just for the record, from the London Development Institute. Our office is at 562 Wellington, Suite 203. There are 4 points I want to make regarding this report, with a request at the end. First is the timing of this report. We are the major appellant of the London Plan, the LDI, and this came out on the agenda last Wednesday afternoon. I don't say noon. Both my legal staff and my planning individual, group that looks after our appeal, are not available. This is mid-summer. It is the week of the long weekend, and you bring forward a major piece of policy change to the London Plan, to the zoning bylaw during that week. Those people who are spending thousands and thousands of dollars, who've been representing us for over the years that the London Plan has been under appeal, are just not available this week. So the timing of this report is suspect, in my view. I know I'm normally in front of you with all kinds of good news about things, but today is not one of them. And then there was Mr. Macbeth talked about the notices before, and certainly I have them, and they say possible amendment, without any details, and which is fine. But I'm as Councillor Turner pointed out in the previous discussion, the report on the major transit study is going out for public comment. Our group will be commenting on it. I think it's a fantastic piece of opportunity for our organization, to be honest, and my members, as long as you guys are able to put up with not in my own backyard discussion that will come, but but that is the kind of thing that, you know, we've been working with the city on settlement discussions for months now, and we have an opportunity to make things better, to make this happen. The fact is, all the maps in the London Plan are under appeal. So how do you have policy stuff when none of the maps are actually in force? Now, I haven't had my professional staff, the consultants we have, look at the actual document. We could be in favor of everything that's in there. I do not know. I don't have that skill set, but I rely on those people to tell me. But I can say things like on page 2 and on page 3, you talk about the zoning bylaw has to conform for the OP. I agree 100%, but the OP that's in effect, and the London Plan is not in effect at present. Parts of it may be, but not the whole thing, and including the maps. So we need time for our planners, at least a cycle, at least to one of the council meetings or a cycle in September, so I can at least give you proper feedback on what that report says. Another thing that boggles my mind a bit is that we have talked about, and we've been involved in this Rethink zoning, which is a great idea. I've been involved on your side of the fence on a comprehensive zoning bylaw change in the community I used to live in. It takes time and effort. We're piecemealing. At one point, we talked about we want a comprehensive review of the zoning bylaw, but here we're piecemealing into Z1. And so it kind of, it's inconsistent, let me just put it that way, that we talk about a comprehensive review once the London Plan's in place, and and we need the zoning bylaw to match. 100% agree. But why are we doing piecemeal here? We've been working hard with the city. I would say we have based on my experience throughout the province and the country, we have a very good working relationship here with our organization and the city and the community. And I think we're working well on a whole bunch of different topic areas and policy areas. And I wouldn't want to see that change. Look, let's be completely frank. A change to the zoning bylaw is appealable. We do not want to be going down that road when we're in the middle of trying to make things, improve things and make things happen. Get that London plan in place in a format that we all can live with. Then we work on the zoning to make sure it matches that agreed upon official plan. But that is not in place yet. The 89 plan is still in fact in many parts of the city's official plan. London plan is coming in, but we still have time. So here's my ask. A deferral for at least a month. So I can have my people at least look at it and give you a proper response. Instead of in the middle of summer. You can do a couple of things, as far as I know. You can receive and file the report, and nothing happened to it, and we'll bring it back again another time. You can put it on the deferral list. I know you have a deferred list on your agendas in the committee share, or just a straight deferral, not having it come forward as a bylaw introduction on the 25th of August, but either the second meeting, the middle of the month in September, you have a council meeting, or on the 29th, I think it is, in the end of September. At least give us a chance to have it, to analyze this significant report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. I will go to the committee rooms to see if there are any members of the public who would like to comment or ask questions about this. I'm looking at my screen. I don't see anyone coming forward to the microphones. So I don't believe there are members of the public interested in commenting on this item, other than Mr. Wallace, who we've heard from. So I will look for a motion from committee to close the public participation meeting. Moved by Councillor Kabaga, seconded by Councillor Turner, and I will call that vote. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Kabaga.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
So I'll go to Mr. Macbeth to respond to some of the comments that came from the London Development Institute and Mr. Wallace, specifically about the timing being suspect and that this being a major amendment to the official plan zoning bylaw and what the characterization might be from staff on those comments.
Through the chair, it's Greg Barrett here. I'll speak to it first. First off, with respect to the timing and the reference to suspect timing, this in fact has absolutely nothing to do with settlement or any of the settlement discussions that are going on. It actually has nothing to do with the maps as to whether or not they're in force and effect. It has everything to do with making Z1 actually usable while we're in this funny little transition between having 85% of the policies in force and effect in the London plan, actually more than that now, and other policies in the current official plan being in force and effect. As Mr. Macbeth noted, what we're looking to do is in fact make the existing bylaw easier to use and be able to be used as that transition bylaw as we're running forward with these two policies. He made reference to the fact that in the general provisions, some of the zones, in fact, are to be used exclusively in certain land use designations that may or may not exist once all of the London plan's in force and effect. And the other thing is that the existing zoning bylaw does not allow for the flexibility that in fact members of the development committee have already taken advantage of through policies in the London plan that allow you to combine uses that in fact is not contemplated under the current plan, nor in the way that the zoning bylaw is structured. I agree with Mr. Wallace 100% that the comprehensive review needs to be done on Z1, and that's part of the whole rethink zoning process. But what can't happen is that we end up with a bylaw that's not usable in between. And so it's not going to be an all or nothing. There are things with the existing bylaw that, regardless of the outcome of the new zoning bylaw, have to be fixed. And we're going to be working on that. And this is one of those things. So I really, really do take great exception to the term suspect timing. In fact, this has been on our work plan for some time, and we've been holding off on it as to have more and more of the London plan come into force and effect, so that we would now get ourselves out of the conundrum of having the inability to, in fact, do what we want to do, which is to zone for and provide for development because of the way that the general provisions are written in the existing bylaw. With that being said, certainly we can take a look at deferring this, and that's certainly up to the pleasure of this committee and council, and we can come back at the next cycle so that Mr. Wallace can be satisfied with what I've said. I would not take his suggestion that you note and file it, nor would I take his suggestion that you put it on a deferral list. I would take the decision that you defer it to a meeting with a date for that meeting when we would come forward with the report. And I guess the only other thing that I would like to say is that Mr. Wallace raised the issue of being inconsistent and piecemealing. And as I noted, in fact, this is far from being inconsistent and piecemealing. It's all about making the existing bylaw workable as we go through this transition, as we're moving from one policy regime to another. There certainly was nothing nefarious intended through this, and it has absolutely nothing to do with settlement discussions, has absolutely nothing to do with maps being in force or not, and it has nothing to do with trying to run something through in the summer when things are quiet. This, in fact, was a technical amendment to clean up your existing bylaw to actually make it usable to implement those policies that you have in force. But with that being said, certainly send it back so that they've got an extra couple of weeks to look at it, and we can put it on the cycle for September meeting to come back for that PPM to adopt these technical changes to the bylaw.
So Mr. Barrett, one follow-up from me based on the comments from Mr. Wallace about deferring this for a month. Would there be repercussions to staff? Would that we have developers who are asking us to move things quickly because we were shut down for so long during COVID? We have applications waiting to be heard. Would deferring this by 1 month, what would be the repercussions to staff and to pending applications that are in the pipeline?
Through the chair, those things that you're going to be hearing about within the next month are already well along, and they've sort of done the jury rigging that we've been doing to try to make the bylaws work. So I would suggest to you that it's not going to have an impact on any of those things that are in the pipeline now that you would be expecting to come within a couple of cycles. Those reports are well in hand, and how we'd be going on those are taken care of. So I wouldn't be concerned about tying those things up.
Thank you. So I'll go to the mayor, and then I will go to Councillor Turner.
Well, thanks very much, Chair. You know, sometimes we say things and wish that we could kind of pull them back. I'm certainly not a little bit. I'm certainly not here to speak for Mr. Wallace, although I've known him a long time. I might suggest that sometimes when we have that opportunity to review the tenor of the words and we push those back, sometimes the messaging is a little different. Having said that, I'm very compelled by Mr. Barrett's comments and his suggestion that giving LDI a chance based on reviewing it in the following cycle would to give LDI and any others for that matter more fulsome opportunity to review these details. So with that in mind, if it's appropriate, and I'm certainly happy to wait till there's more discussion, or I can happy to move a motion that we, based on what I've heard from Mr. Barrett, that it doesn't hold anything up. And I think, frankly, we as a community are a fair community. We want to give people the chance to review. They may come back and say all's well, whatever. I'm not here again to presuppose, but I'd certainly be prepared to move motion, Chair, again, if appropriate, that we defer voting on this until the next cycle in September.
Thank you.
And I'll let the clerk words make me sound better than I am.
Nobody can make you sound better than you do, Mr. Mayor. And I meant that in the positive way, not.
Yeah, it's one way or the other.
So I'll hold your motion in abeyance. I note that you have an intention to make a motion that this goes to the next cycle of planning committee, and clerks are working on that. I'll wait to see if there's a seconder. I'll go to Councillor Turner first, and then I'll go to Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd be happy to second that motion when the time comes. I usually when we receive presentations and motives are aspired to others, I usually give 2 chances. And I was listening for the second one. I'm glad Mr. Barrett had a chance to speak to that. I think in this this kind of peri-COVID time, as we're trying to get through public participation meetings, we're trying to get a lot of things off the books and taken care of. And I accept the explanation by Mr. Barrett and Mr. Macbeth that the intent of this is to be able to move things forward and not to try and rush things through without proper scrutiny. As I look through the list, it's quite clear that the intent is to be able to use the London Plan, where the London Plan is in force and effect, and not anchor us to the 89 plan where it's no longer in effect, and it's very much a housekeeping set. I think it's fair that the LDI has a chance to review through this. That's not too much of a challenge. But that said, we've also been coaxed by the LDI to get these things moving as fast as possible, because it is holding up development. And so I appreciate the concern. I also appreciate the explanation and the intent through these amendments. And I think the sooner they're in place, the better. But I would also raise the flag that the reason why a lot of development opportunities are not moving forward is because of the vast amount of appeals that have been launched by LDI. So that's very important to note. So it can't have both. Right? In order for us to be able to do things, we're trying to move within the framework that's been presented to us because of the appeals, and here we are. So thank you to staff for recognizing that there's some impediments for being able to move forward, trying to find that bridge, and proposing solutions to move forward. I look forward to the comments in a month's time.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And I will be supporting the motion to have this come forward to the next planning meeting to allow LDI to make their comments. But I would like to say, and it's very hard, even as a committee member, when I hear from the public that we are under suspect, I take that very personally, because I do think that staff bringing this forward, this is a technical amendment, regardless if I support this today or I support it in the next planning meeting. That's what we're doing here. We're looking at moving things forward, and that's what I would think the development community would like us to do. And I do take exception to that word suspect. I want to thank Mr. Barrett for his comments, we'll move this forward to the next cycle. But for me, I made notes. Technical amendment, interim measures, 85% of the London policies are in effect. I am looking at something why I would not support this recommendation. I do not see anything in this report. And I appreciate Mr. Wallace's passion for moving things forward. But I think it's also important to note that we have to work together on this, and we are all trying to move things forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other comments from committee? I see Councillor Turner's blue hand is still up. I think that's just an oversight. So I just want to also chime in. I agree with everything that my colleagues have said. I want to thank Mr. Wallace for his delegation, and but I also want to thank Mr. Barrett for being very clear on the purpose of this report and what it is accomplishing, what the amendment will accomplish. We've been in this transition period for quite some time. The development industry has been straddling these two official plans for quite some time as well. And in fact, when we see design briefs and rationale for going for City Council to approve an amendment to allow their development to take place, it is very common that the development industry uses rationale and arguments that, where this development supports the policies of the London Plan. So we've all been straddling these two plans, and the development industry has been very adept at targeting the policies of the London Plan in order to provide the arguments in favor of their particular application. So this has been going on for 3 years now, and staff have done an excellent job as well on straddling this transition. It makes sense that wording in the old official plan will need to be updated and changed for the parts that are no longer, wording in the new plan, or the old, whatever. We need to straddle these two plans. And there are terms and references that are no longer applicable. So just as the portions of the London Plan that are not in play, not in force and effect right now, are things that will be considered when development applications come forward. In the words of legal counsel, they're important, but they're not determinative. And so it makes sense as we get more and more of the London Plan in force and effect that we're going to have to change terminology in our zoning bylaws at 1 so that it reflects the new reality and what's actually in force and effect and what official plan we are using to adjudicate different planning applications. It makes sense. And I agree with Councillor Hopkins that I don't necessarily take it personally when motives are ascribed to our staff, but I do feel a certain amount of, I don't know, the protective feeling towards our staff. I know that our staff, especially in the planning area, act with utmost professionalism. And this report was extremely thorough and extremely well explained. And I'm very grateful to staff for yet another report that makes it easy for me, because I'm not an expert, at least not the way a professional planner is, but this report was extremely comprehensive and easy for me to follow. So with that, I have a motion on the floor by the mayor, and I have the clerk waving at me, so I'll take a pause.
Thank you, with apologies and through the chair. This is a question from the clerk's office to the planner as to whether or not an additional PPM would be required, or whether or not the committee would like to incorporate granting delegation status for LDI into the motion, into the referral motion.
I guess that's for you, Mr. Barrett.
Thank you. Through the chair, the only folks who've come to speak to the matter are the LDI, and if they were afforded the opportunity to speak as a delegation at the next meeting, that would be fine. I just don't know, though, out of an abundance of caution, do we note that no further public notice be given, but we note that the LDI will be providing delegated opportunity for delegation, or should we just come back with another PPM, and just out of an abundance of caution, anticipating that it might just be the LDI who are speaking to it like they were this time, but there have been some concerns raised, and there may be others who now with the extra month, want to jump in on this. And if we were to come back with just a limited delegation, it might be seen as limiting. So we would have no issue. I'm sure it's more an issue of scheduling, but we wouldn't have an issue with this being a PPM to provide the opportunity for others to speak.
I'll go to Councillor Turner and then the mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Barrett. I think that sounds reasonable. This isn't a specific site-specific application, so sending out notice isn't required in the same manner where we have to mail out notice to property owners within a certain radius. This can be satisfied by public notice in the newspaper, I believe. Perhaps I could just confirm with the clerk on that, or through Mr. Barrett. And if that's the case, then I think the question of whether we have a PPM or not is rather moot, and why not just on the abundance of caution, just make sure it's open as a PPM.
Through the chair, certainly, the notice, yes, certainly is much more limited as a citywide amendment, and we probably have a very small additional mailing list on this that for people that might have raised an interest. It would have included all the appellants. So just again, so the committee knows, all of the appellants were made aware of this, but we will circulate it to all and provide everybody the opportunity to come back. And as Councillor said, I think an abundance of caution would be to just have it scheduled as a PPM.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Mr. Mayor.
Thanks very much. Once again, I'm in agreement with Councillor Turner on so many issues. This would be the same circumstance again. And I obviously to give any parties who wish to have some comment on this. I just think I think it speaks to a lot of issues in terms of broader community involvement for those who choose to, and at the same time, it gives us as council the chance to, or committee to the chance to have some dialogue with them as well. It's always a delight to hear Mr. Barrett, so I'm good with that.
Okay, so we have a motion moved by the mayor, seconded by Councillor Turner, that this item will be deferred for one cycle and it will come back to the planning committee at September 8th with a PPM. Are there any other comments or questions on this? Not seeing any, I will call the question. Councillor Hopkins?
Yes.
Councillor Turner?
Yes.
Councillor Keabaga?
Yes.
Mayor Holder?
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Moving along to item 3.2. It's a public participation meeting for a draft plan of vacant land condominium at 3635 Southbridge Avenue. I will look for a motion to open the PPM, moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. I'll call that vote. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Keabaga.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
I'll go to Mr. Mottram for a very brief introduction on this item. Oh, sorry, no. Yes, that's right. Mr. Mottram, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I hope that you can hear me all right.
Yes.
All right. We're here to consider an application for a proposed draft plan of vacant land condominium by Sifton Properties Limited. It is a residential development proposal on a block within phase 2 of the Richardson subdivision located there on the east side of Warncliffe Road South, just south of the intersection of Bradley Avenue. The policies of the official plan and the London plan require that public notice be given and that a public meeting be held for vacant land condominiums. Notice of application and notice of public meeting were sent to the property owners in the surrounding area. There were no replies received from the public. The purpose of this meeting is to report to the approval authority any issues or concerns raised with respect to the application for a draft plan of vacant land condominium and the application for site plan approval, which has been reviewed concurrently. This plan consists of 57 two-story attached townhouse units with access from Southbridge Avenue. The site also is bounded by Middleton Avenue and Warncliffe Road South. The plans and the building elevations have been reviewed by staff and are generally in compliance with the city's placemaking guidelines, the Southwest Area Secondary Plan, and the Richardson Subdivision Urban Design Guidelines. As noted in our report to the committee, site planning and urban design staff are working with the proponent and have provided them with feedback for improving site design and building orientation for the units facing Middleton Avenue, in recognition that of its importance as a key entry point and gateway to the neighborhood. So with that, Madam Chair, if there are any questions from the committee regarding the staff report, we would be happy to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Mottram. I'll look first to see if the applicant is here. That's the applicant in committee room 5, and you'd like to address the committee. Go ahead, state your name, and you'll have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'm Lindsay Clark with Sifton Properties, and I'd just like to say that we are in agreement with the recommendations brought forward this afternoon, and I am available for any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. Are there any technical questions for staff or the applicant? I'm seeing none. Are there any members of the public in either of the committee rooms here to speak to this? I'm not seeing any movements. Are there any public members looking to speak to this application at 3635 Southbridge? Seeing none, I will look for a motion to close the PPM. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Hopkins, and I will call that vote. Councillor Hopkins? Yes. Councillor Turner?
Yes.
Mayor Holder?
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Any questions or comments from the committee on this item? Do I have a motion? I believe Councillor Turner is moving the staff recommendation, and it's seconded by the mayor. I'll call that vote. Councillor Hopkins? Yes. Councillor Turner?
Yes.
Mayor Holder?
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Next item is 3.3, a public participation meeting for a draft plan of vacant land condominiums at 3575 Southbridge Avenue. I'll go to Mr. Mottram on this one. Sorry, first I have to open the PPM. Moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by the mayor. I'll call the vote. Councillor Hopkins? Yes. Councillor Turner?
Yes.
Mayor Holder?
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Now I will go to Mr. Mottram.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is to consider an application for a proposed draft plan of vacant land condominium by Sifton Properties Limited. And it's very similar to similar proposal to the previous application, which is also located within phase 2 of the Richardson subdivision. There were no replies received from the public in response to the notice of application and notice of public meeting. The application for draft plan of vacant land condominium was reviewed concurrently with the application for site plan approval. The plan consists of 58 two-story attached townhouse units with access from Southbridge Avenue. The plans and building elevations have been reviewed by staff and are consistent with the intent of the official plan and the London plan, with the zoning bylaw, the Southwest Area Plan, and the Richardson Subdivision Urban Design Guidelines. So if there are any specific questions from the committee regarding the staff report on this proposed vacant land condominium and site plan, we would be pleased to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Mottram, and I see Ms. Clark again at the microphone. Would you like to speak?
Thank you again. Just to restate, I'm Lindsay Clark with Sifton Properties, and we are also in agreement with recommendations brought forward, and I am available again for any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public in the committee rooms to speak to this item, 3575 Southbridge Avenue? I'm not seeing any movement towards the microphones, so I will look for a motion to close the PPM. Moved by the mayor, seconded by Councillor Hopkins, and I'll call that vote. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Any comments or questions from committee? Do I have a motion? The mayor and will move the staff recommendation, and Councillor Hopkins is seconding that motion, and I'll call that vote. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Item 3.4 is a public participation meeting about an application at 221 Queens Ave. And I'll look for a motion to open the PPM. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by the mayor. I'll call the question. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
And I will go to staff for a brief introduction of this item.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Through you, this is Isaac de Keuster, file planner for application TZ917 by Sifton Properties Limited. The application pertains to 221 Queens Avenue, located on the south side of Queens Avenue between Clarence Street and Wellington Street in the central London planning district. The existing fully paved parking lot contains 65 regular parking spaces plus 2 handicapped parking spaces on 0.24 hectare. All parking spaces are leased on a monthly basis to employees and tenants of surrounding office and commercial premises. For context, the rapid transit system will run along Queens Avenue. The construction is scheduled to start in 2021. Similarly, at this time, no public parking facilities are planned or have been developed in this high demand parking area. The purpose and effect of the requested zoning bylaw is to extend the temporary zone on site to allow for an additional 3 years of commercial surface parking. The site has been used as a surface parking lot for approximately 25 years. Between 1995 and now, the property has been subject to periods where the temporary use bylaw was expired and not renewed, and has also been the subject of several bylaw amendments to reinstate or extend the temporary use zoning. The latest extension for the temporary surface parking lot was adopted in 2017 and expired on June 26, 2020. Staff is recommending to extend the existing temporary use T69 zone to allow for the continuation of the existing commercial parking lot on 221 Queens Ave for a period not to exceed 3 years. Rationale for this recommendation is on the basis that the proposed amendment is consistent with the 2020 provincial policy statement, conforms with the 1989 official plan, and the enforced policies of the London plan, including but not limited to the downtown place type, temporary use provisions, temporary parking criteria, and these design criteria. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any additional questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. de Keuster. And I see Ms. Clark is at the microphone again representing Sifton. If you'd like to go ahead.
Thank you. Just again to reiterate that we are in agreement with the recommendations brought forward, and I am available for any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a technical question, Councillor Turner? Did I see your hand go up?
It's kind of twitching, but yeah, I've got two technical questions.
Go ahead.
Just a question of how the site aligns with the city's parking strategy. That's would be for Mr. de Keuster.
Mr. de Keuster, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, through the chair. Out of all the temporary surface parking lots in downtown London, 221 Queens Avenue is one of the most visually appealing ones we have. In addition, it is also located in one of the sub areas that have been identified with a very high utilization rate of 81%. Although the recommendation is a gradual approach to discontinue temporary zone permissions for surface parking lots, it also states that this should happen in areas where utilization rates are low, and sub-area 4 is one of the highest areas. So staff is recommending to extend the bylaw for at least one more time in order to wait for rapid transit and for potential public parking nearby. Thank you.
Councillor Turner, you have another one?
Yeah, thank you. And that's for the representative for the applicant. Question would be, has Sifton or the owner started to contemplate what future uses might be should the temporary parking permissions expire at some point?
Yes, so I am not entirely certain on our future plans for this area. I do know our current demand is necessary as it does service 3 of our primary commercial buildings downtown located at 171 Queens, 200 Queens, and 195 Dufferin. So those are currently what we're requiring the surface parking for to support these commercial buildings. So I can't state for certain what our future intentions are of this property, but I mean, at that point down the road, we can revisit this, you know, in terms of the extension of the temporary zoning bylaw.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. Are there any other members of the public that have questions or comments on this item? I'm looking in the committee rooms 1 and 2 and 5 to see if there are public participants who would like to speak to this application. I'm seeing none, so I will look for a motion to close the PPM. Moved by Councillor Turner and seconded by Councillor Hopkins. I'll call that vote. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Okay, committee, comments, questions on this application? Councillor Turner.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I remember this from about 3 years ago, at which point I asked similar questions. And at that point, the applicant had identified that they had no plans to redevelop the site. For exactly the reasons as mentioned by the representative of the applicant, that it was servicing multiple multiple buildings, and that the intent was to maintain it as a parking lot. As expressed before, I have challenges with these temporary conditions that just get extended in perpetuity without really setting parameters for what we would expect in the future. If they're truly temporary, then they expire at some point and they don't continue. If they're not temporary, then we try to figure out a way to embed that in a permanent manner, rather than having to go through this this process every 3 years. I think what I'd want to say in this is that I hope that Sifton starts contemplating what future use looks like. This is directly on a rapid transit corridor. The intent is to be able to start shifting people from cars and into other modes of transportation. There are opportunities for redevelopment of the site that could include the same number of parking spots, but actually ensure that a higher use is established, whether that's with a residential or commercial property on the same site with parking incorporated. I imagine that my colleagues will probably vote in favor of the extension. I'm not going to in this circumstance, but what I would like to say is that and ask is that the applicant starts to think about what future use is and start to plan for that, so that when this is before committee again in 3 years' time, that there's a good answer for that, because at that point, rapid transit corridor will be well underway, if not completed, in that area.
Thank you, Councillor. And depending on how the vote goes, perhaps that's something city staff could convey to the applicant or the applicant's agent who's present as well, that city council are hoping that they start to develop some plans on what could be higher or better use of the property that does incorporate parking possibly. I'm going to go to Councillor Hopkins now.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I will be supporting this motion very reluctantly. I did hear from staff at least one more time, and I think that is really important. We as a committee, I agree with Councillor Turner 100% when these temporary extensions are no longer temporary. We, you know, it almost seems like we need a different way to do this, and I'm relying on staff to some extent to do the reviews, to look at what's coming down through the process as we undertake our rapid transit system downtown. I think there's going to be a lot of changes. I think we should allow that flexibility and really encourage the SIFTA to really start thinking about what is going to happen in this corridor. One of the things I hear from visitors to our city, downtown in particular, is all this parking spaces that we have around. And I think there's a different way of doing things, and these temporary leases that we have are not temporary to me, and I reluctantly will support this, but I hope staff will work with the applicant to have those discussions as we change how our downtown will be looking in the next couple of years, and hopefully we can move forward to get rid of some of our parking spots downtown.
Thank you, Councillor. Mayor Holder.
Thanks very much, Chair. I will be supporting the staff recommendation. Look, here's what's clear. We are, I'm very mindful of Councillor Turner and Councillor Hopkins' comments and about the almost the repetitious futility of renewal. I am sure that if we were prepared to do something longer than 3 years, any applicant would likely consider that. But here we've got one of the highest use areas for parking where I think the challenges are greatest. And until there's an alternative, and I think that may well come, when it does, I think we have an open mind to what works best. But I would share with you that until London gets to the point where we are talking about limiting vehicles downtown, and I think we're a long time away from that. And by the way, that's not been suggested by either of my colleagues. But until that time, there will be need for parking, and this has one of the greatest needs with the least amount of parking right there in that particular area. I just think it makes sense, certainly for today, and we will determine the future accordingly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I pass the chair to the Vice Chair, Councillor Turner, to just make some comments?
Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So I'm going to support it as well. I'm glad to hear that there will be support for this staff recommendation. I hear my colleagues. I've agreed with them every time these temporary extensions come before us. It's because of these temporary 3-year extensions that the last term of council, we asked staff to go back and come back to us with a downtown parking strategy, which they did. And it made it much easier for City Council and Planning Committee to adjudicate these requests for extension. It gave some logic to the ones that we should consider. I like the fact that this, as Mr. DeCuster said, this particular lot aligns well with the city policies, that it's visually appealing. And I would say thank you. I think we should acknowledge Sifton Properties for trying to make this less of just a big ugly slab of asphalt in the middle of downtown. I recognize the fact that the applicant has made efforts to do the things that staff asked them to do with screening and plantings as much as is possible. So I want to address the comment that often is made in London that there's no parking downtown. I lived in Toronto and Mississauga for 10 years. I've never had a problem finding parking in downtown London. The problem is often Londoners don't want to walk from their parking spot to their destination. And when you're in a city like Toronto or Mississauga, it's a given that you're going to walk a couple of blocks, unless you're really, really lucky and you happen to get an on-street spot, which is really rare, really close to your destination. So London has ample parking downtown. I appreciate the fact that the downtown parking strategy has it zoned out into different sectors and shows the utilization rate and the vacancy sort of on these different lots and the different sectors of the downtown. So it allows us to see better where there's a need for parking. And obviously this specific area of downtown London, there is a high utilization rate in this lot and therefore a high need for parking. I remember speaking years back to Mr. Sifton about his particular employee base and the high rate of transit users that work for the Sifton company. I think he had told me something like 50%. So I know that there are tenants in the buildings, and we're not talking about necessarily Sifton employees, but knowing that rapid transit will be coming by here will afford us an opportunity down the road. Perhaps we will see utilization on this lot go down as rapid transit comes online. The other thing is that in other districts in the province of Quebec, I believe, they are able to assess property taxes on a site like this at its highest and best use. So the highest, I know that there are, in the report, they talk about limitations of development on this site that may or may not be, but at some point, if we were in a different district, maybe the highest and best use would be, you know, rather than a high rise, it could be a 2 or a 4-story building. And to have property taxes assessed on what the highest and best use would be an incentive for landowners to develop that land. Because as we know, the highest value land in the city that brings in the most in property taxes is the downtown land. So when we have these surface parking lots, it's an incredible loss in value to the city as a whole, where we have vacant land holding cars, when it could be designed in such a way to hold cars and people, whether through jobs or residents. So the final thing I want to say, because I'm not the chair right now, I'm not timing my comments, and I figure I'm getting close to the end, is right now we're in the recovery, we're looking to the recovery phase from the pandemic, and there had been a shutdown where non-essential businesses were shut down. We don't know what's going to happen as we come out of this recovery. A lot of people were working from home. 80% of our office jobs are in downtown London. And at this point, at this precarious point in our economic situation, I don't want to do anything to discourage people coming back downtown to work, to shop, to play. So I will support this extension for all of the reasons that I just mentioned. And with that, I will finish my comments.
You have the chair back.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Are there any other comments or questions? I'm not seeing any, so I will call the vote. Oh, we need a mover first. Who I believe I had two, Councillor Hopkins. And so Councillor Hopkins, I saw you first. She will move the staff recommendation, and the mayor is seconding the staff recommendation. And with that, I will call the vote. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
No.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes. Mr. Barrett, I see your hand up. Did you need to speak? Okay.
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, sorry, I wanted you to get through the vote first. I didn't get a chance before, but I just wanted to introduce Isaac. Isaac is a new planner with us, and actually tonight was a big evening for him. He had an item on the consent agenda that you actually pulled and spoke to, and he had this item on this evening as well. Normally, if we were in a normal circumstance, I would have been able to introduce him to the committee in person, but I wanted to acknowledge that this was his first virtual appearance before you, and wanted to thank him for the work that he did this evening. Thanks.
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Barrett, and welcome, Mr. DeCuster. Councillor Turner, you have something to say?
Yeah, welcome, Mr. DeCuster, and you'll find from time to time councillors will ask questions that were answered in the reports you wrote, as I did already. So thank you for tolerating that. I appreciate it.
Closing the vote, the motion passes 3-1.
Thank you. We did things a little irregularly there, but thank you to Mr. Barrett for acknowledging Mr. DeCuster. The next item is 3.5, and it is a draft plan of vacant land condominium at 965 Upper Point Avenue. And I will look for a motion to open the PPM. Moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Turner. I'll call the vote. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
I have Mr. Maxula on the agenda as speaking to this, so I'll see if he would like to give us a brief introduction.
Sure. I'd like to thank you, Madam Chair. This is an application for a proposed draft plan of vacant land condominium by System Properties Limited. This is a residential development proposal on 2 blocks within the River Bend South subdivision, currently located on the southeast Oxford Street West and West Elborn. Notice of application and those public meeting were sent to property owners in the surrounding area. There are no replies received from the public. The purpose of this meeting is to report to the approval authority any issues or concerns raised with respect to the application for draft plan of vacant land condominium and concurring application for site plan approval. The plan consists of 66 attached townhouse units with access to Upper Point Gate. The plans and building elevations have been reviewed by staff and are generally in compliance with the city's placement guidelines, the Riverbend South secondary plan, and the Riverbend subdivision urban design guidelines. The site planning and urban design staff are working with the proponent on improving the building orientation adjacent to Upper Point Gate in recognition that this is a key entry point and gateway to the neighborhood. An additional application for the removal of whole divisions applied to the site is also under review and will be brought forward for consideration for the future meeting of the Planning and Environment Committee. If there are any questions from the committee regarding the staff report, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And I see Ms. Clark again, if you would like to go ahead.
Thank you again. I just want to again reiterate that we are in agreement with the recommendations, and I am available for any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll look to the committee rooms to see if there are any members of the public that are interested in item 3.5. Any members of the public who would like to speak to the 965 Upper Point Avenue application? I'm seeing none, so I'll look for a motion to close the PPM. Moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by the mayor. I'll call the vote. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
All right. Any questions, comments, or motions from committee? Councillor Hopkins.
Madam Chair, I'd be happy to move this recommendation. It is in my ward. There aren't any significant comments or concerns. I know there's a lot of development in this area, but happy to move the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there a second? Seconded by the mayor. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
That brings us to 3.6, our final public participation meeting of the evening. It is an application at 2040 River Road. I'll look for a motion to open the PPM. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. I'll call the vote. Councillor Hopkins. You gotta let me say your name first. Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Great, and that is Ms. Wise, if you would like to give us a little intro on this one.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, committee. Before I begin, I just wanted to quickly note that there has been a revised recommendation and bylaw that was submitted this afternoon, which would add a holding provision to the recommended zoning. The requested amendment at 2040 River Road is to add a waste transfer station and recycling depot use to the site for the collection, transportation, sorting, and recycling of various waste materials. We'll start with the description of the site, context, and use. The site is comprised of an existing single detached dwelling located at 2040 River Road and a large triangular vacant piece of land to the northeast. The dwelling will be repurposed for the office and a weigh station will be installed at the neck of the site. Access is proposed from River Road and the unopened Scanlon Street road allowance to the north. Waste would be collected in containers and bins and brought for sorting on site for reclamation, recycling, and/or disposal. The site is within the general industrial designation in the 1989 official plan and the heavy industrial place type in the London plan. The primary permitted uses for the site include a broad range of industrial uses that can generate significant nuisances such as noise, vibration, air emissions, hazardous materials, and open storage. Composting and recycling facilities are permitted in all industrial place types in the London plan, but preferred within the heavy industrial place type, which is where the subject site is located. There are a variety of intensive industrial uses currently operating in the area, such as salvage yards and cement plants that currently surround the subject site. The proposed waste transfer station and recycling depot use supports the London plan policies that promote the reduction, reuse, recycling, composting, and the recovery of materials from solid waste wherever possible. And this use would divert materials that would otherwise be directed to landfills. With regards to compatibility, there are several existing legal non-conforming single detached dwellings within proximity of the site along the north side of River Road. The proposed use was assessed with regards to the impact and compatibility with nearby sensitive uses as required by the D6 guidelines. It was found that the existing dwellings are already located within a highly active and intensive industrial node, which are exposed to current nuisances such as noise, dust, and vibration. The subject site is currently within a zone that permits a variety of other intensive industrial uses, and the proposed waste transfer station and recycling depot is anticipated to have a similar range of impacts to those that are currently permitted. The proposed use is considered to be appropriate and compatible with the site context, and the remnant residential uses are anticipated to transition to other permitted industrial uses in the long term. With regards to the environmental compliance approval, in the London plan, if proposed operations require an environmental compliance approval from the ministry, such an approval would be applied for concurrent with the application for zoning. A pre-submission consultation with the ministry and the applicant occurred on April 10th, 2019 for the environmental compliance approval and the proposed use. On February 20th of this year, the ministry approved an environmental compliance approval for a waste management system as permit A800-735, which allows for the storage of vehicles and bins on site. An additional environmental compliance approval, however, will be required to be obtained from the MECP following the zoning amendment application process to further allow for the waste storage and handling on site. The London plan requires that final reading of the zoning bylaw amendment will be withheld, or a holding provision will be applied to require the environmental compliance approval as a precondition. The city is recommending the addition of the H47 holding provision for this reason to ensure the certificate of approval provides opportunity for municipal input. This is again found as the revised recommendation that was recently submitted. With regards to the area of Upper Thames River Conservation Authority and area of open space, a portion of the site is located within the regulated area of the UTRCA and also within areas of unevaluated vegetation patches and unevaluated wetland within schedules B1 and B2 of the city's official plan and map 5 and map 6 of the London plan. Through this application review, it was determined that various site alterations occurred at the northeast corner of the site, which is the area within the unevaluated natural features and the UTRCA regulated area, without prior assessment of the environmental features or a Section 28 permit. These site alterations included tree removal, changes to grade or berming, and subsequently changes to a watercourse and a portion of a wetland. Notice of violation was issued from the Conservation Authority on December 10th, 2019. The applicant, the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority, and city staff have been collaborating to positively rectify the situation, and an area of the site has been identified for natural restoration and enhancement. This renaturalized area is recommended to be zoned as open space, OS5, which would only allow for passive uses and would provide for the long-term protection of the restoration area. To sum up, the requested waste transfer station and recycling depot use is appropriate for the site, and the recommended amendment is consistent with the provincial policy statement and conforms to the policies of the general industrial designation and the heavy industrial place type. The area of open space will provide for the future protection of a natural heritage area to be renaturalized, and the inclusion of the H47 holding provision will ensure the municipality can participate in the conditions for the future certificate of approval. I wanted to note again, Madam Chair, that there is a revised bylaw available for the inclusion of the H47 holding provision, and also to note that there are UTRCA staff in attendance in the public galleries to provide any input or answer any technical questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Wise. I'll check to see if the applicant or agent for the applicant is here and if they would like to speak to the committee. Okay, just come forward and state your name and then you'll have 5 minutes.
My name is Victor Silva, and I agree with all the recommendations. And if anybody has any questions and concerns, feel free to ask.
Thank you, Mr. De Silva. Are there any members of the public here to speak to this? So I'm just conferring with clerk on something. Okay, so I'll go to committee, and I see you there, Councillor Hillier. Right now, we'll see if there are technical questions for the applicant or for city staff, and also noting that representatives from the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority are present as well. So if committee or visiting councillors have technical questions, I'll go to the mayor first, and then I will go to the ward councillor.
Well, thank you, Chair. Perhaps to Ms. Wise, just based on your review, just trying to understand what materials are being handled or intended to be handled, stored, or transferred to other sites. Could you give us some clarity around that, please?
Ms. Wise.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. The actual definition being requested is for a waste transfer station recycling depot, which is a type of waste disposal site that allows for non-hazardous solid wastes and liquids. There is a general definition for a waste transfer station within the city's zoning bylaw currently that would allow for the processing of liquid and hazardous waste. So the distinction is this is for non-hazardous solid waste and liquids. The specific operator typically deals largely with building and construction debris. So it would be fairly broad in terms of what could be processed on site.
So if I can, if you don't mind, a couple of questions through you, Chair. So I know we've got other handlers of these various materials. So talking about primarily on the construction side, like where do those products go? I know we have a pretty significant sorting function in the city, but where's the ultimate site where these products go? Are they in London? Where are they, please? Ms. Wise.
Through you, Madam Chair. So for the proposed operation of the site, if your questions with regards to that, the unsorted items would be delivered through bins on site, and then they would be separated into their different composite parts, so wood, metals, plastics, that sort of thing. And then they would be diverted based on the type of classification. So some would probably go to the landfill, others could be recycled in that situation.
All within the London area, through you, Chair?
Through you, Madam Chair, that may be a question that the applicant would be better to answer.
Sure.
Mr. De Silva.
Yeah, well, ultimately, I've been in business for 30 years. I still don't see people doing it 100%. I grew up in it as a kid. My dad started the company, and yeah, we're going to separate and sort whatever we can to eliminate stuff going from landfill. A lot of the other competitors do truck a lot of stuff to the States. That's kind of not my plan. My plan is all my residual waste to go to the City of London landfill. Obviously support the city we live in and create some more jobs there, right? So ultimately, yeah, mostly construction material. It'd be a sorting facility that we could pick whatever possible that is recyclable. And yeah, the residual would stay in the London W12 landfill.
So, Mr. De Silva, I think the mayor's question is about the products that you will be recycling. Where will they end up?
Ultimately, whatever stream they are. It's pretty hard to tell you that right now. But ultimately, yeah, wood would be either mulched and reused to make mulch, or to make pallets, or drywall, shingles, concrete, obviously crushed again, and to make recycled gravel products.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, thanks very much. Again, back to Ms. Wise, if I could, please. I'm trying to know, is the zoning recommendation that is being considered here consistent with the other recycling and waste operations in the city? Any differences, basically?
Through you, Madam Chair, there are a pretty extensive list of various types of recycling waste transfer facilities in the city. So there's approximately 12 to 15 different types. They would be specific to the type of material that they process. So it would be different from every site in terms of what their parameters are. There is one other waste transfer station and recycling depot operating in the city. That is a unique definition. That is a refined version of our normal waste transfer station.
Sorry, perhaps through you, Chair, to staff, perhaps my question wasn't as clear, or maybe not even as specific, but all I'm trying to understand is it's like same for same. So if there's a certain type of waste product that is being recycled, rehandled, redealt with one firm, is it consistent and the same with another firm? I'm trying to understand if the rules are consistent as per type of waste. Is the zoning consistent right across the board for, again, I'll call it like for like? Please.
Through you, Madam Chair, I would say that the process to establish this type of facility would be the same across the board. First step is to establish the zoning in terms of the permission for the land use, whether or not the site would be appropriate. Of course, every site would be slightly different in terms of its own context and parameters. Then there would be the environmental compliance approval with the ministry that would be required. And then there's also a site plan approval process. So that would be consistently applied throughout the city in terms of the process. And again, each site would be slightly different, but I hope that answers your question.
Well, it certainly does in part. Perhaps I can go one other way as well, because I just want to understand. I mean, if there's one thing I appreciate about this committee, is that they take issues of the environment exceptionally seriously. And I would say that from my experience, the city has incorporated a pretty significant environmental bar, and in terms of all the processes that it looks at. And and that's certainly been my sense since I've been on this committee. And there are colleagues that have been on this committee longer than I have been. So what I'm trying to get a sense of is there any change, compromise, difference in the standards that are being asked of this firm with its application as it is of the current and existing firms that deal with that?
Madam Chair, it's Michael Tomazinski here, if I can chime in.
Go ahead.
We don't have applications for this type of use very often. In fact, this is the first one that I can remember, although someone might challenge me on that. And so for me to say that we treated other people consistently or not, since this is the first one, I can say that any others that come forward will be treated in the same manner. So there's the rezoning process, which we're deciding today, and then there's the site plan and the operations of the facility, which come later through the MOE certificate and site plan. And they might have different operational standards, which I just would not know about because it comes through a subsequent process. But in terms of how we treat these sites through zoning, then I would say, yes, we are being consistent.
So then, since tonight's focus, Chair, is on the zoning component, and this proposal is a light industrial zoning, is that the same zoning used for other waste disposal sites that exist in the city? Through you to staff, Chair.
Through you, Madam Chair, just as a point of clarity, so the site has currently a general industrial zone on it, and a portion of the site is light industrial. The recommended zoning is to have the light industrial added to the entire site so that it would be a split zone. That means that the specific use for the waste station would be added to the general industrial zone classification, zone variation, and that is something that would be appropriate in that zone family.
And Chair, I appreciate that. So my question was, is the proposed light industrial, the broader zoning, has that designation been used on other waste disposal sites currently in existence?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes. So the other operating waste transfer station and recycling depot is within a general industrial zone, and that is of the similar. But that is the exact same defined use and a similar type of facility.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, staff. I may come back in with a question or so, but I appreciate that information.
Councillor Hillier.
Thank you very much, and thank you for receiving me today. I'm assuming this is a large business expansion. I'm looking at the site and it looks very nice, and I'm all in favor of that, but I have a few concerns. One, they're staying within the current list of materials that they have now. When I go on their website, I'm looking at contaminated soils, and now I'm looking at this site and I'm wondering, are they going to be doing more storage on this site? Because if they're going to be stockpiling contaminated soils, we're going to have an issue with water runoff. And I'm curious about this.
I believe that's for the applicant.
Yeah, we do. Our trucking company does truck a lot of contaminants, so not a lot, but you know, a little bit over the years, right? All our contaminated soils all goes to GFL up in Dorchester there. So ultimately, we're close to a facility that does recycle it. So that's really why we do a lot of it, right?
So it won't be stored on site then?
No, nothing, okay. Nothing liquid or hazardous waste would be stored on site. Kind of my idea is to, instead of having these huge piles that make a mess and create dust and so on, I want to be a lot more efficient. I want to bring it in and bring it out right away. I don't want to have these stockpiles that look like huge mountains. You know, that's the last thing I want to do. I want to be just small, efficient, and clean, right?
And that's exactly what I'm concerned about. Large piles of this stuff gathering, and then the wastewater, because we're a lot closer to the river now.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. I've seen some of the other facilities, and yeah, they do stockpile big piles, and it floods from time to time, and so
yeah,
kind of, yes, that's totally what I want to avoid, because obviously, just business-wise, the more water gets in those piles, the more expensive they are to get rid of in the end, right?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Hopkins, and then Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're still on technical questions here, right?
Yes, Councillor.
Thank you for the reminder. So I do have a couple questions. The first one I want, maybe this is to the applicant regarding organic waste. How is that dealt with here on this site?
Mr. De Silva, will you be processing organic waste on this site?
Yeah, ultimately, yeah, there would be no composting or anything like that on the site. Ultimately, what you might see is maybe some dirt that gets sorted out and stuff. But other than that, no, nothing that would be composting or organics.
So I understand no organic waste on this site. You'll be, and the reason I'm asking that question, it relates to odor and smells, and I know dirt can smell too if there's some organic component. So I'm not sure what I heard. Again, if you could be clarify, are you going to be storing organic waste or processing organic waste on this site?
No, not at all. I do understand your concern for the smell and stuff. Actually, in the application, it actually states like no household waste and stuff like that, right? So really, that household waste or composting, that's what would really create smells on. I'm sure you guys have seen it around the city in the same cases, right? But yeah, this is strictly, I'd say 95% construction and demolition material will be sorted, you know, to pull wood and steel and drywall and shingles out. And obviously residual goes to landfill, right?
Okay, thank you, Mr. De Silva. Councillor Hopkins, any other questions?
Yes, I do. And just following up on my first question there, and maybe this is directed to city staff, would that, the organic waste portion of this facility, would that be considered through a site plan, or would there be recommendations through that site plan that organic waste would not be part of this facility? To city staff?
Sorry. Through Madam Chair, the defined use that is requested is fairly broad. It just has to be non-hazardous solid and waste. So that could include household waste, you know, despite not the user intending that. If the committee wants, there are other definitions that could be used in its place. Specifically, we have a construction and demolition recycling facility that would be more appropriate and is specific to that type of industry. And then there would have to be certain additions for things like contaminated soil that aren't specifically included in that definition that are part of the operation. So there are options if there is an issue with the range of uses and waste permitted on site.
Thank you for that. And would that happen through rezoning now, these definitions to be suggested or incorporated, or is that part of the site plan process?
Madam Chair, that would have to occur through the zoning. So that would be the defined use, specifying what would be permitted on site.
Thank you for that. And my second technical question is around the H47, which is the amendment that is being introduced here to the previous recommendation. Could you explain the H47 holding provision, just for further clarification?
Certainly. Through you, Madam Chair, the H47 is a requirement for the applicant to receive an environmental compliance approval from the ministry. There was a little bit of confusion in terms of the timing when they received their ECA in February of this year, what exactly was involved in that ECA. And as it turns out, we learned that it is not for the full use. That would still have to be permitted by council first. It was simply for the storage of empty bins and vehicles on site. So it was in error. We thought that they had achieved their ECA ahead of time, but it turns out they need yet another one. So that's why the H47 is being proposed.
Thank you for that clarification. My last question, Madam Chair, is regarding consultation with our Director of, with the City of London Environmental Services. Will that be part of the process moving through the site plan process?
Ms. Wise.
Through Madam Chair, so during the circulation process, we do reach out to our colleagues in solid waste, which was the case here. So the various departments received notice in July as well as in June of this year. So notice was provided, and we were engaging the manager of solid waste later in the process than usual, but he is aware of the application and the future opportunities for involvement and discussion.
Councillor Turner.
Thanks, Madam Chair. It's generating a lot of discussion. Couple quick technical questions. I think as I read through this, it appears that the delineation of the OS5 is based on the fact that is this correct, that the environmental feature has not been evaluated through an environmental impact study, and so the delineation is that to the greatest extent then that any potential buffers or a distance separation from the operation and the feature would occur?
Ms. Wise.
Through Madam Chair, we also have the city's ecologist, James McKay, on the call. I might just defer that question to him.
The clerk is going to comment here.
So we have not had Mr. McKay join the meeting as of yet. We do have an unidentified person waiting in the waiting room, so I'm not sure if that may be Mr. McKay or not. I've reached out to his manager to find out if that's the case, but I haven't heard back, so I'm not sure. But he's not currently in the meeting.
So Mr. Feldberg had his hand up briefly there, and then he disappeared from my screen. Are you there, Mr. Feldberg?
Yes, Madam Chair. Typically, Mr. McKay does have an unidentified phone, but I will connect with him if we could defer your question, Councillor Turner, for a few moments.
Fair enough. I think what the general gist of the questions that I'm going to ask surround the delineation of the separation between the operation and the environmental feature. The Upper Thames is recommended in OS4 and an OS5 in this circumstance. I think we applied the OS5 because it incorporates all the same protections that would be included in an OS4 as hazard lands. So I can appreciate that. In the report, it goes on to talk about how the patches and areas here are environmental review and unevaluated lands. So I wasn't sure if there was a condition as part of site plan to require an environmental impact study so that that boundaries and delineations and buffers could be appropriately identified. The second concern that I have with that is associated with the buffers tend to be associated with, I guess, land disturbances that might change water flows and stormwater management, any interruptions of groundwater recharges, PSWs, the size and significance of a significant woodland. I'm wondering to what extent buffering or distancing has been contemplated in terms of any possible seepage of materials that might be processed or handled that could have toxins in it. And Councillor Hillier raised the point about infiltration into the water system, the river or otherwise, and how that's. I think from what I'm reading here is that it's identified by taking the greatest extent, but I'm wondering if EIS is contemplated or has been performed.
So I wonder, Ms. Wise, if you can answer about if the EIS has been contemplated.
Madam Chair, I might just start this, but we do have UTRCA staff that I think would also be able to provide a helpful response. With regards to the EIS requirement, it would have been something that we would have asked for during the application review for the zoning, and also the disturbance of that site was also within an area of the regulated area of the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority, so they would have required a separate permitting process as well. if this had gone to site plan without being caught at zoning, it's possible that they would have required it there as well. But I might just hand it over to my colleague at the UTRCA, if that's all right.
So we also have Mr. McKay on the line. Do you want me to go to him first, Councillor Turner?
I think both would be helpful. I read the UTRCA comments. They seem to support the rezoning, but with some specific conditions in there. So I think the two of them would be very informative to my questions.
So I will go to the Upper Thames River people first, because Mr. McKay may not have heard the question, and perhaps Mr. McKay can chime in when he hears the gist of the conversation. We may have to repeat the question for him, but I'll go to Committee Room 1 and 2, where we have the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority people waiting.
Through you, Ms. Chair, I'm Stephanie Pratt, Land Use Planner with the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority. In regards to your questions, Councillor Turner, regarding the OS5 and the setback, our minimum requirements for the natural hazard features are a 15-meter setback. And from the natural heritage feature, we require a minimum 30-meter setback. Because the lands have been cleared in advance of doing any of the appropriate studies that we would typically require through the process, we have set those minimum requirements as a 30-meter from the natural heritage feature. So that isn't the greatest extent of what could be possible, but given the fact that the features on the landscape have been altered, we are not requiring a study moving forward.
So through you, Madam Chair, thank you for that. In our natural heritage guidelines, our buffer distances are 30 meters from an identified edge, usually through an EIS. So where the feature hasn't been clearly delineated through an EIS, would that not indicate a larger buffer requirement?
At this point in time, we can't justify doing that because we're not sure of what the feature was on the landscape previously before it was cleared. So it's hard to determine what that exact buffer would have been prior to that clearing. And so that's why we placed the minimum 30 meters on the edge of the feature that we can see present today.
Thank you. And for Mr. McKay, I think the question here is that if there's the question of an environmental feature on the land and a usage, does that not necessitate an EIS? And has one been done? And has that been reviewed?
Through you, Madam Chair. Sorry for the delay there. So in response to your question, yes, typically that is what is the standard procedures. You were required to do an EIS for that. This has been a complicated situation given that it was the site was cleared some years ago. So we've been working with the applicant and through the UTRCA with their Section 28 violation to try to come to a best outcome for both the applicant and for the city and the natural features on the adjacent property and for what potentially was there before. And I believe in response to your earlier question about additional setback from the OS5 zone, the OS5 zone represents the total setback for the applicant. So there's, I believe, a 0 meter setback to the zone line in this particular case. Sonia can speak to that.
Okay, thank you. So I think my concern rests there that there typically would be an EIS associated with an application of this type, especially if we're going to delineate an OS5. That tends to be a fairly high standard. I think the only question that remains for me, I do have concerns with that. I recognize there's been a fairly extensive involvement between Upper Thames as the regulatory agency, staff, and with the applicant to get to where we are. Fair enough. Are we satisfied that sufficient distancing and measures are in place that will protect anything within the OS5 or any of the natural features adjacent to or within the property from any of the activities that are being contemplated or could be allowed within this zoning? Recognizing the ECA will provide some parameters to that, but that the ECA could be amended or changed or a new one could be applied for in the future.
Through you, Madam Chair. So specifically with relation to the ECA, that would have to occur on lands that are already zoned to permit the use. So that would be only on the waste transfer portion of the site. That's the main reason that we wanted to go with the OS5 was that it properly delineated the part to be retained and preserved. So we think that that's strong protection for that restoration area, and it will continue long term. The only thing that would change its nature would be another zoning bylaw amendment application.
And I think through you, Madam Chair, the final question to that is that it looks like stormwater management is something to be contemplated in the site plan phase. That the stormwater management, as it would be designed, would be sufficiently designed to provide runoff protection to those features.
Yes, Madam Chair, I believe that's a correct statement. Stormwater management would be managed on site for this application. And just to note that there would be an additional separate environmental compliance approval for stormwater through the ministry as well.
Thank you.
And I see Councillor Van Holst has had his hand up. Welcome to this committee, Councillor. We're still on technical questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I was just going to ask a question through you to the applicant. Perhaps they could just design, we hear about natural features. Perhaps they could just describe the natural features that are on the site briefly.
That's for you, Mr. De Silva. In the report, though, Councillor, it talks about the natural features to a large degree had been removed, which is why the Upper Thames Conservation Authority has been so deeply involved in this application. But I'll go to Mr. De Silva to describe what natural features are still on the property, or perhaps which one, how you are looking to reinstall the natural features that had been removed.
Okay, well, Stephanie, I think you can agree. That's why we kind of had a lot of time and delays here. Our consultants and assistants weren't agreeing with everybody and so on. I think I've kind of done my part with the buffer more than what is probably needed. But I do agree with it, and I'm happy with it. And ultimately, we still state that there is no natural features on our site. There was an unevaluated vegetation patch, which I can state on record that within 25 years, when I was a kid, about 10 years old, it was farmland, right? And yeah, little trees and bushes and stuff grew on the site. That was our main disagreement, I think, was that there was no natural features on our site. And adjacent to our site, they do believe that there is, and that's why I created the buffer. Because beside our site, there was an unconfined system built there back in 1989. And that's, I believe, the main natural feature that we're trying to protect here. If you can agree with me there, Stephanie, on that.
So in the review of the aerial imagery, when we first received the application, we noticed that there was some vegetation present on those lands that was identified in the city's mapping as unevaluated, which typically triggers, like we mentioned, the EIS that moves forward. So as we were out on site 3 times in the last year, we have been able to determine that there is still a water course feature present. It runs right adjacent to the property. Within 1 meter is the closest proximity, and our natural hazard boundary falls within 15 meters of that, keeping the property regulated. And then in addition, on the adjacent lands, there is a wetland, unevaluated wetland present. And so because the site, again, was cleared, we are unsure of those exact extent of what that was previously, but we can say that there is confidently that natural heritage and natural hazard feature present within 1 meter of the subject lands.
Councillor Van Holst.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Perhaps make some comments when technical questions are figured out, but I'm happy with that answer.
Thank you very much. I see a blue hand in the air, and oh, it's down now. Okay, and I see the mayor put his real hand up. So go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
I could put both hands up as you prefer, Chair, but I have a question, if I can, Ms. Wise. I was surprised that just very late as our meeting started, I received, perhaps all of committee received, a letter from some planners, like a preamble with respect to questions regarding this particular application. And I wonder if Ms. Wise might have some comments on that letter, presuming that, to be fair, that she's received it, and it wasn't that long ago that I received it as well.
Who's the letter from, Your Worship?
Zelenka Priama Limited.
And when did the letter come in?
Oh, I think it was sent in around 4:30 p.m. today. So, or just before 4 o'clock. Or just around 4 o'clock, pardon me, please. So around the time our meeting started, Chair.
Ms. Wise, have you seen this letter?
Yes, Madam Chair, I have reviewed it.
I just wonder if you have any comments, because I think as we look to make our evaluation as well, I think those are big questions that or issues that they brought forward, and that's why I think your input would be really helpful to us as a committee. If you would, Ms. Wise, please.
Do you have any comment on this letter, Ms. Wise?
Madam Chair, I believe the letter stated some concerns in terms of the general operation of the site. I believe in the preamble or one of the first paragraphs, it did state that it wasn't necessarily a concern with the land use itself on site, but there were concerns raised with things like the stormwater management, the operation, and the use of a holding provision. So we have had the opportunity to review the letter, and actually we knew it was coming a little bit ahead of time. So it allowed us to do a little bit more review in terms of whether or not a holding provision is required for this site. We determined that it was, and that's a recommendation that you have before you now. The stormwater management, we are comfortable in terms of its it being addressed through both site plan and through the separate ECA process with the ministry. And in terms of the general review, we base this on the use, the intensity, the form, the compatibility, the environmental impacts, all of the official plan and the London plan criteria for appropriate location and separation of these types of intensive uses, and do believe that this is an appropriate use for the site in the site context, and is taking appropriate measures to ensure compatibility and sympathetic integration.
So, Chair, through you, and I actually will echo again, Councillor Turner, that we have spent a fair amount of time on this, because I think it is important that we get it right. I'd like to be a little more pointed, because for the benefit of those who haven't seen this, and you indicate that you saw this perhaps ahead of some others, but you're correct that what is said in this note is that the rezoning to allow waste transfer and recycling is not opposed, but there was a concern, I'd like you to comment if we can, that it be done in a manner that incorporates the environmental protections that the city has insisted upon in other similar waste handling projects, to suggest somehow, though, that there's a difference between the environmental protections required by this application versus the others. Is that a fair comment by the letter writer?
Madam Chair, this is Michael Tomazinczyk here. It's hard for me to answer that question, because there aren't very many specifics provided. There's no addresses provided. There's no addresses of who Mr. Zelenka is representing. I noticed there's names of clients, but I'm not sure where they're located, and I can't comment on the processes that they went through. So a little bit more background would have been helpful to answer that question. I can say, as Ms. Wise indicated, we have done some additional research after receiving this letter, including some discussions with Mr. Stanford. He's happy with the holding provision that's going to be applied to the site. We're confident that through the site plan process and through the certificate of approval process, that the site workings, operations, can address the other matters raised in this letter, and that as a use, it's an appropriate location for the subject site.
Well, just again, Chair, just to be clear, and I'm not here to challenge, we've got great staff that do tremendous work, but I mean, the names of the companies that represented by Zelenka Priama are right in the very first line of the letter, and they're all companies that we deal with. So, I mean, they manage waste in the City of London. So I don't think these are not credible organizations, and I think they've expressed some pretty specific things. I just want to set the record straight that we all know who these players are, and they're all based here in London, and they all work in waste recycling. I just am not to challenge our staff, but just to bring clarity to that point, Chair.
Okay.
I have no more technical questions at this stage at all, and I think our comments can be done in general.
Okay. Are there any other technical questions? I'm not seeing any. I'm going to see if I can't remember. It's been so long. If I asked if there were members of the public that were here, I believe I did, but I'll ask again. Are there any members of the public that would like to comment on this application in those two committee rooms? I'm not seeing any members of the public come forward. Mr. De Silva, you spoke to committee and you had a chance to answer questions. So we're past the technical question phase, and we're actually going to close the public participation meeting now, if I have a motion to do so. It's moved by Councillor Hopkins and it's seconded by Councillor Turner, and I'll call the vote on that. Councillor Hopkins?
Yes.
Councillor Turner?
Yes.
Mayor Holder?
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Okay, I have Councillor Turner's blue hand in the air. Go ahead, Councillor.
Great, thanks. I'll be really quick. I'll support the recommendation coming from staff. It seems to have accounted for a lot of the considerations that I might have concerns with. The letter that came at close to 5 o'clock on committee night is challenging. I'm not always wild about last minute submissions like that. It's very hard for us to digest, and I think we need to recognize there's a competitive interest by the respondents in that letter. That all said, that doesn't take away our responsibility from identifying environmental and land use planning considerations. I think we need to make sure that those are well contemplated. The involvement of Upper Thames as the regulatory agency in this and the collaboration with our staff in order to come to a recommendation that's thought through the risks and the appropriate zoning recommendations, I think, are well considered. I do have concerns that there hasn't been a formal delineation of environmental review lands, and we're just moving to OS5. That said, that's probably the best outcome because sometimes the EIS might provide less protection, especially in a circumstance where a feature has been removed or altered or damaged. The site plan seems like the appropriate place to contemplate things like stormwater and stormwater management, and done so in a way that's associated with the operation that will be on site. The environmental certificate of approval process will ensure that the operations on site are the appropriate operations. The only thing that remains for me is that if the operations that are being contemplated in the ECA change and require a new ECA, I don't think we need a new rezoning for that, and perhaps the site plan modification or the site plan that is a resultant of the ECA and the operations that are being applied for today might not be consistent with the operations that it may change to in the future. And maybe that's my question before I leave all of this is, what ability is there if the parameters of operation on the site change and they obtain a new ECA, what ability do we have to impose new site plan requirements that are consistent with that changed operation but are still permitted within the zoning that we're about to give?
That's Ms. Wise or Mr. Tominzinski.
Madam Chair, it's Michael Tomazinski here, and unfortunately, I'd rather just consult with my site plan colleagues rather than say something erroneously. And if the councillor would permit, I can see if I can get in touch with my site plan colleagues, but it might not happen tonight, unfortunately.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Thompson-Sick. I'm okay with that. Perhaps if we can have that in time for council. I think, I mean, my read on it is that we wouldn't have any recourse to go back and impose a new site plan requirement, that once we've passed the first site plan that's associated with the zoning, that's that. We've given all the approvals and it doesn't come back to us if the ECA were to change. And so we don't really have carriage of that. I think the holding, I don't know if there's any mechanisms that we can have in place to provide that that review should the ECA change. And maybe I'm just thinking in hypotheticals, which is quite possible. I do that a lot. But I've seen even with a request to do a minor variance application within the 2-year window, those are the kind of things that where we've handled a file and then suddenly the whole parameters change and something else comes back to us later on. So that's the reason I raise it is because I've seen a few times where the parameters have changed after we've given approvals. I just want to make sure that we've contemplated all those eventualities and that our zoning and our site plan are future-proofed, I guess.
Thanks, Councillor. I've got Councillor Hopkins and then Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And, you know, this is quite an interesting recommendation. And I think the challenge is that we're receiving a lot of late information too. So trying to process this is being a little bit of a challenge. I do support Councillor Turner's concerns around the ECA and getting further information before council would be appreciated from staff. I think we really have to understand how that all works. I still do have a concern around the organic waste and the odors that can result from that. And I understood from staff that there is a possibility of another definition, and that this definition should happen at zoning as opposed to site plan. So I'd like further clarification and comments from staff. Is that something that we can recommend right now with with regards to organic waste and adding a certain recommendation or definition to the zoning?
So Ms. Wise, you had mentioned an alternate zoning to consider, but it wasn't in your recommendation. So if you could let the councillor know what that alternate rezoning would be and why it wasn't in your recommendation.
Through Madam Chair, so there is another use that could potentially be applied to this site. The exact use that's requested is a little bit more broad than what the construction and demolition recycling facility allows. So that construction and demolition recycling facility, I'm just going to read it out, processes non-hazardous materials from construction and demolition projects and other sources, including wood, drywall, brick, concrete, asphalt, shingles, glass, and scrap metals. So that use is, it seems to be the bulk of what is being requested. However, it doesn't address things like contaminated soils that are also part of the business model for the applicant. So I believe that's why they requested and why we have been considering the waste transfer station, or sorry, the waste transfer station and recycling depot, because it's a little bit more broad and it allows for their full range of uses. However, that said, the construction, demolition, recycling facility use is a more refined list of the waste transfer station type of uses. And if the other types of uses that are being requested by the applicant are added to that definition, it would eliminate some of the questionable uses, things like household waste that would be contemplated through the waste transfer station and recycling depot as it is currently defined. That would take staff a little bit of time, I think, to prepare for the committee.
Councillor Hopkins.
Well, I would like to recommend that definition, but I'd like to know a little bit more about the time restraints here for staff to make this happen.
Ms. Wise.
Madam Chair, it's Michael Tomasinczyk here. Perhaps I'll just quickly chime in. Depending too, if we need to require another public notification, and we probably should, just to err on the side of caution, we are looking at least the 1 month, but I would say optimistically the second meeting, planning committee meeting of September, just to ensure that we meet our statutory notice requirements.
Councillor Hopkins, you still have the floor. I wonder, and I'm suggesting a question that you could ask, is maintain the rezoning that's been recommended by staff, but add organic waste as something that would not be allowed, notwithstanding the broader definition?
If I can do that, that would probably be the easiest way. I would be looking for support from the committee to do that. And I would like staff's comment on doing that.
So Mr. Tomazinski or Ms. Wise, would it be possible to go with the staff recommendation, but specifically not allow organic waste as part of the materials that would be allowed?
Madam Chair, my only concern would be if materials like wood, which are organic in nature, if they would be restricted as well, which seems to be part of the function of the site. So we may need a minute to review, but it could be something like restricting household waste or something like that, which I think would better define the exemption.
The councillor is nodding her head that would be acceptable. So if you want to think about that or confer with colleagues, I have the city clerk, Ms. Saunders, has her hand up, and I will go to her.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have some concerns with the public notice. Always concerned about changing bylaws at the meeting, especially to add or remove uses when the public hasn't been notified of that change. So I just raise that concern as you're considering this.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Councillor Hopkins, you have the floor still.
Well, the public participation part would be important to that process. So I for now will not add that amendment, even though I can express my concerns about moving forward with this. I am in general favor of the recommendation and looking for more information with the ECA coming forward to council as well. So I think this may be a further conversation at council. I appreciate Upper Thames, not only for being here tonight, but also for their letter clarifying the work that has been done through the restoration of this property. As you can well imagine, looking at the photos and seeing how this property has changed, I definitely would encourage the applicant to continue working not only with city staff, but with Upper Thames as they go through the process. So for that, I'm generally supportive.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Van Holst. If you're speaking, we can't hear you, Councillor, but you have your...
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. But when I spoke with Mr. De Silva about his plans and his team, it was clear that to me that they're environmental good guys and trying to do something positive for London. I don't believe the business model is to have anything like an anaerobic digester or those kinds of things that are creating a lot of smell, or to take source separated organics. I mean, when we talk about organics, I think we mean in our head food waste, but things like shingles are made from organic chemicals, and these are the kinds of things that we should see some exciting new developments with. So their plan was to try to be on the cutting edge and implement some new technologies for dealing with these items so that we can divert even more from the landfill sites than we are now. And I think that's encouraging. This is also, and I agree with staff, an appropriate use for the area. This is a part of my ward where you find the big wrecking yards, and certainly not a place where I would expect to see the development of ecotourism. If I could just be a little facetious, I think it's fine here. We're not. This is a good use, and I'm pleased to see that their plans don't involve shipping garbage a long way away. Of course, that's a source of much greenhouse gas emissions. So we're cutting down on those things. Having a business like this in our city, I believe, would be a good thing. And I think this is a pretty appropriate area for it in my ward. There's certainly places where I wouldn't want that to happen. But those are my comments, Madam Chair. And I hope the committee supports this.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Mayor.
We haven't had a long chat about an issue like this in a little while, and I think it's a healthy dialogue. One thing I want to respond to about the lateness of a letter that came in. You'll know that we get our communications and our minutes and review of information late the prior week, and then it becomes public as well. And I would say to you, no one likes last minute, but frankly, we've got some exceptionally credible organizations represented by this letter, and their right to express their view. And I think as timely as these things might be, and I'm not here to defend them, but I'm here to support their right to do this. And if it comes in a little later, because frankly there wasn't a lot of notice, regardless of the agenda as it came forward. So that happens from time to time. I don't fault them nor the writer of the letter. But I want to come back, if I can. I think one thing I've come to appreciate about this committee as I've been on it is their focus on the environment and getting it right. And I liked where Councillor Hopkins was going in terms of trying to put definition around what it is exactly that the folks with this firm are looking to do. And I agree, to try to create policy on the fly like this is not helpful, particularly as it's sensitive to zoning issues. And you know what? If we already had an experience where we've deferred something earlier in the night earlier in this discussion by a cycle, because that made sense to do that to make sure that we got it right. I don't think deferring this a month and trying to ask our planners to work towards definition is harmful. Certainly not harmful to the applicant. I don't believe they can respond to that. I think doing it the right way, where it's thoughtful, because again, we want to get this right, and I would rather get it right than quick. And it may well go down the direction that everybody that some of the folks here intend, and I think that's fair. But I really did think that, and I think the clerk is right. Policy on the fly is wrong, but giving our and you know what that would mean? That would mean another public participation meeting, and I don't see an issue with that at all. To get this right, so if Councillor Hopkins was looking forward to putting something forward, or I'd be happy to make a motion that we proceed, and unless there's already a motion on the floor. I'm forgetting now, Chair, it's been so long. Can I just clarify where we are with that?
There's no motion on the floor.
Well, I wonder, and I'm trying to get the wording consistent with Councillor Hopkins on this, that, look, there's been a number of questions that have come up, thoughtful ones by colleagues, some answers that I think require some clarity, and I think some things that require definition. And I think what would be helpful would be to ask our planners to take this back, answer some of those questions that have come forward, put definition to the area that is required, and it just feels like a thoughtful thing. And I don't say this in trying to ignore the applicant's efforts. I applaud them looking to try to do what they do, but I think there's enough questions out there that we want to get this right on behalf of Londoners. So whatever way you can word that, clerk, and then that would be a motion that I would, and if you heard what the planners said, our planners have said, is that they could take this back and rework it through. And again, I don't have an issue with the PPM. Again, I won't repeat myself 5 times. That's wrong, but certainly once. And I hope that council would support it, just to get in the spirit of trying to get it right. That's all in answering the questions.
Okay, so we have a motion to refer this back to staff for possibly an additional PPM as well. But I have a question to staff about the timelines here. This is a rezoning application. Where are we in our timelines?
Madam Chair, it's Michael Tomazinczyk here. We are long past the statutory timeline. We required more time for the applicant in the UTRCA to resolve the environmental issue. And so that took up some time that we would normally use during the processing of this application. I believe, Sonia, Ms. Wise can correct me, but I believe we're well over a year. So we're well beyond the statutory timeline.
So I'll look to Ms. Wise to confirm, but would this be appealable to the LPAT?
Through you, Madam Chair, we are coming up on a year. I think it's October, so we're about 9 months into the process. So even without the temporary timeline that happened with COVID in terms of the Planning Act processing, this is well over the required time frame, yes.
And it's appealable?
Yes, Madam Chair, it is for non-decision.
Thank you, Ms. Wise. Councillor Hopkins, I'll go to you, and then I'll go to Councillor Turner, and then Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And one of the reasons I am supporting the recommendation, even though I do have some concerns around the organic waste portion, I'm reluctant to, keep this application on hold. We're past the timeline as it is. I'm not willing to defer this back further. I wasn't prepared for another public participation meeting as well to look at another definition. All this information, like I said, has come to me at this last minute, and I needed information and discussion. I really appreciate everyone's comments to understand exactly what we're doing here tonight. And I am not prepared to defer this or prolong this process, even though I do have those concerns around the organic waste, household waste portion of that. And I'm hoping staff are hearing this as they proceed through the site plan process and undertake. I think this is an unusual situation that we've got in front of us with this recommendation, and it does need a bit of conversation and debate and understanding, and thank the committee for it.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. So Councillor Hopkins has indicated that she will not second the motion to refer it back. Councillor Turner, you're next on the list, and if that makes it easy, you can respond if you're willing to second a motion to refer this back, and you have the floor.
I am not willing to support the motion to refer. Perhaps I can give the mayor an opportunity to find a seconder before I go into comments.
So I'm the only one left, and I'm not willing to second referral either.
Okay, thank you. So I think it might be helpful here. I mean, we're talking about a few hypotheticals about what could or could not happen, and I take the applicant at his word about what his intent is for the site to for me, it's a question of way down in the future of what might happen with those changes, but I think that probably would result in zoning changes. From a question of whether there be smelly organics on the site, I think that's a question of whether that's common in these operations. This isn't a waste storage site; it's a waste transfer site, and it's I think it's exceedingly uncommon to see household waste brought to a transfer site prior to going to a landfill. A transfer site is usually associated with sorting and being able to make sure that those materials are diverted and sent to other locations. In this circumstance, I would say that there's very, very, very low risk that this is going to be a site that's going to be processing household organic waste. And so hopefully that puts some concerns to ease. I don't think there'll be the risk of significant odor on this site. For me, it's more a question that liquids and solids are able to be processed on there, and that there might be the risk of runoff. And if the stormwater management in the site plan is designed sufficiently to contemplate all eventualities, then I think that's probably sufficient. And that would be my recommendation for the site plan phase, is that stormwater management consider, or the plan for the site plan is to consider any use that might be approved or available to the operator under that zoning, just so that we have the highest level of protection associated with that site. So I'm happy to support. I think we've heard sufficient statements from staff, from both our staff and Upper Thames, that these eventualities have been contemplated, and I'm happy to move forward with the staff recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. So the staff recommendation is moved by Councillor Turner, and it's seconded now by Councillor Hopkins. I will go to Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm pleased with the direction the committee's taking. I know our mayor is very conscientious and wants to get things right. I would remind us, though, that the council, 2 councils prior, there was a lot of deferring matters. And the one thing I think we've done well in the last 6 years is to bring that to a minimum. So I'd like to have us send things back only when it's really needed, and especially in a situation like this where the applicant has really given us a lot of time in order to address other issues. So I think we built up a great deal of trust there, and I think that we can trust them to move forward in the right direction. And so thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Van Holst. Are there any other comments or questions from committee or visiting councillors, if there are any left? So I'll just say briefly that this application has been a long time in the process, and I appreciate that the applicant, I was not aware that it has been as long as it has, and the applicant was well within their rights to appeal this for non-decision, and it could have been decided by the LPAT. And we may have missed some extra protections in place. I do appreciate as well that the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority has been so deeply involved in this application and has provided a lot of expertise and recommendations to our staff. I appreciate, in contradiction to what was stated or implied in a last-minute letter, but it was stated numerous times by city staff that Mr. Stanford has been involved in this process and has weighed in. And I'm confident that Mr. Stanford will continue to be involved during the site plan process and lend his expertise as necessary. As we consider residential redevelopments and residential rezoning, we tell residents all the time these issues will be handled at site plan. These issues will be handled at site plan. Stormwater management is often a very big issue for residential development, and communities are often told, usually told, that issue will be dealt with at site plan and dealt with appropriately. So I have confidence in staff when this gets to the site plan phase that all of the issues, especially stormwater management, will be adequately addressed. I also take heart in the fact that the Ministry of the Environment will also be involved going forward. So with that, I look one more time to see if people would like to weigh in again, and I'm not seeing anyone. So the staff recommendation has been moved and seconded, and I will call the vote. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
No.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 3-1.
Thank you very much. That takes us to the items for direction. 4.1 is request for a council resolution under section 45 of the Planning Act. And it's regarding 745 to 747 Waterloo Street. I will go to either the city clerk or the deputy city clerk just to explain this item. We've had this come before us in the past.
Madam Chair, did you wish me to speak to it?
Yes, go ahead. Thank you, Ms. Saunders.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a request from the applicant to ask for permission from Municipal Council to submit a minor variance application in accordance with the Planning Act. So the background information is before you. Planning staff would provide a planning recommendation to the Committee of Adjustment should Council grant the minor variance application request to move forward.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So this was Mayor Holder.
Yes, I have to declare a pecuniary interest. My daughter and my wife own Razzle Dazzle Cupcakes and Bernard Callebaut Chocolates out of the location at 745 Waterloo Street.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I apologize. I should have remembered to go to you on that.
Thank you.
So this is a matter that came before the staff during the rezoning phase, and the applicant is looking for a minor variance because of the Planning Act. It has to get approval from this committee and council first before it can go to the Committee of Adjustment for a minor variance. The applicant has also requested delegation status. So I'm looking to committee to see if we can approve that first and hear the delegation first. So Councillor Hopkins, you're moving that we will hear the delegation, and I'll look for a seconder. And I will second that motion. Are there any comments or questions on the request for delegation? Not seeing any. So I'll call that vote. Councillor Hopkins?
Yes.
Councillor Turner?
Yes.
I vote yes. Mayor Holder is recused.
Recused.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Mrs. Dornbosch is in committee room 5. Go ahead and state your name for the record, and you'll have 5 minutes.
Good evening, committee members. My name is Michelle Dornbush. I'm with Brock Development Group. The request that I have before council is simply to submit a minor variance application for the existing building at 745 Waterloo Street. In September of 2019, a medical clinic went into the adjacent building at 747 Waterloo Street. Prior to that, I did a rezoning application on the property to allow the clinic itself. The second building had the clinic permitted, but strictly on the main floor. And then the second floor of 745 Waterloo was to remain as a residential unit. Obviously, with the significant changes that everyone's experienced with COVID, the medical world is seeing a number of changes and differences, especially with surgeries at the hospital. So at this point, the medical clinic, it is a plastic surgery clinic, and as opposed to doing the surgeries at the hospital with the staff that they already have in place, they would like to change the second floor of 745 Waterloo Street to a surgical, private surgical suite, so that they can accommodate private surgeries outside of the hospital facility and utilize their existing staff. Typically, they have set surgery dates, so they would, the staff would go to the hospital, and as opposed to that, the staff would just remain at the existing facility and use the building that they have and install that surgical suite internal. So it doesn't, it will not generate any additional staff and things like that. So there won't be any changes from what you would see there today. But essentially, the purpose of it is to ensure that that second floor of 745 can be modified to accommodate that as opposed to a residential unit. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them for the committee members.
Thank you, Ms. Dornbush. Committee members, all right, do you have questions for the applicant? It doesn't look like we have questions. Oh, we have one from Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's for you, Ms. Dornbush. So the approval was granted in October of 2018. So the time period for 2 years expires in 2 months. So why come forward at this point?
We'd like to get the process going, and again, with the sorry, through you, Madam Chair, we would like to get the process going, and as well, with all the unknowns with COVID, it's hard to say what's going to happen with the second wave, if the hospital is going to shut back down. So we thought it best to initiate the process now, get it going, in case there is a second shutdown at the city and as well at the hospital.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dornbush. Any comments or questions from committee? Councillor Turner.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I won't support the referral or the leave to seek minor variance. The opportunity presents itself in a couple months, notwithstanding. But if looking back at the file from 2 years ago, we were rather explicit that that this was a special provision that allowed for them to operate in this manner. So I'll read for you from that. This requested zoning bylaw amendment is to permit an expanded range of office conversion uses in addition to the uses already permitted on the subject site. The applicant is also seeking special provisions to recognize the existing landscaped area of 14%, whereas 30% would be required, and the existing 8 parking spaces, whereas 26 parking spaces would be required. It goes on further to talk about the rationale of the expanded action, or recommended action. So it says by restricting the office conversion uses to the ground floor of the existing building at 745 Waterloo Street and the entirety of the building at 747 Waterloo Street, rather than the entirety of both buildings as requested by the applicant, the parking requirements for the site would be less than the parking requirements for the existing permitted uses. The applicant has indicated a willingness to accept the special provisions limiting the permitted uses to the ground floor of the existing building at 745 Waterloo Street and to the entirety of the existing building at 747 Waterloo Street. So we contemplated this 2 years ago. There was an acceptance of the provisions within that and the special provision. The challenge ends up being a fairly significant one associated with parking here, and that is a challenge to accommodate on that site. And so that's why the zoning that was permitted and the special permission that was put in place were there. So I don't see any reason to grant leave here. I think we were really clear, and what's being asked for here is to be able to reverse a very explicit decision. It's not even something that was contemplated later. It was contemplated at the time that the zoning was provided. So I'm not going to support the request.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hopkins? Oh, I thought you had your hand up.
Yes, Madam Chair, I'm in agreement with Councillor Turner. I am not supportive. It was explicit and special provisions were made at the time, so I will not be supporting the request.
So I have a question for staff, noted in the report, and I remember when this came forward, and the neighborhood was quite concerned about the parking issue. And they were concerned what the effects would be on the surrounding neighborhood. So it notes in the report that part of the council resolution was that civic administration be requested to review in consultation with the neighborhood the traffic and parking congestion concerns raised by the neighborhood and to report back. It is noted that report back with respect to Part B has not yet been submitted. So my question to staff is has the consultation happened? Is there a report back that is imminent or to be expected soon with regard to the parking and the traffic concerns?
Madam Chair, it's Michael Tomazinski here. And I believe, going by memory, the last time that was discussed, we had our transportation colleagues in planning committee with us. So they would be best to respond to that. It would be on their work program. As far as I know, though, this has not been initiated yet. I know they're going through some staffing resource issues at the moment, but I don't believe that this has been initiated. But certainly it would be on their work program, and so I wouldn't want to answer for them about when it would be initiated.
Thank you, Mr. Tomazinski. So I share the concerns of my colleagues, especially when a consultation was promised to the neighborhood, and part of the rationale to allow for the reduced parking was that there would be some residential and it wouldn't all be office conversion. So knowing the concerns that were raised, knowing the promises that were made, and I'm concerned that it has taken this long and we have not had that consultation yet, that concerns me greatly. But to go ahead and allow this to go through to the Committee of Adjustment immediately, knowing that the neighborhood will feel very disempowered, I believe, and very ignored if we were to allow this to happen. So I'll look for a motion from my colleagues. Councillor Turner.
I'll move to receive the delegation, take no further action.
Thank you, Councillor. And it's seconded by Councillor Hopkins. And receive the staff report as well.
Yes.
So I'll call the vote on that. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
And I recuse.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 3 with 1 recused.
That takes us to item 4.2, which is a communication that we received from Glenn Pearson and Jane Roy of the London Food Bank, requesting to waive the fees for citywide planning application. The letter was on our agenda. I do believe we also have a representative from the London Food Bank in Committee Room 5, and he's not recognizable because of his mask. So I'll go to committee to see if there are any comments or questions, or if you have questions for the applicant. Councillor Turner.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Through you to staff, my concern is waiving fees regardless of the benevolence of the organization. We haven't done that necessarily in the past. However, the fact that this is looking for a citywide zoning bylaw amendment, I think, is a little different than a site-specific request. That said, is there a possibility for this to be a city-initiated official plan amendment or zoning bylaw amendment that would be associated and aligned with the urban agriculture strategy?
I guess I'll start on that through you, Madam Chair. It's Greg Barrett speaking. Certainly, this is completely in alignment with the urban agriculture strategy. I believe the issue is sort of more along one of timing and the ability to bring this forward now. Quite honestly, if we were to put this on our work plan, it's not something we get to right away. And I believe the food bank now is looking to expand the opportunities for this. It is very much in alignment with the urban ag strategy, and it's something we would support. It's something we would certainly work with the applicants on to bring it through the process. But I believe in this instance, the waiving of the fees will bring forward this matter faster than we would be able to as a city initiated file. But it's certainly one that would be consistent with the policy direction of the urban ag strategy.
Councillor Turner.
Through you, Madam Chair. Yeah, so then is this generally supported by staff then? Is this an appropriate way for us to move forward? It looks reasonable to me. I would certainly consider it on an exception basis because I think that ends up being a challenge. I do recognize that nonprofits and NGOs should be using their funds towards delivering the programs that they have rather than spending it on some of these administrative processes. That said, we also need to contemplate how we continue to recover the costs associated with processing these applications. I think in this circumstance, it's consistent with our general policy objectives in the urban agriculture strategy. And since the contemplation is citywide rather than site-specific, I'm supportive of that. I would just look to staff to ensure they're aligned with that, or if they have any recommendations of best ways to move forward and to accomplish the same objective.
Mr. Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Certainly, we will look forward to actually working with the applicant on this process. I believe I know the person who would be leading the project on behalf of the applicant, and I think that we can probably make something happen. And as you noted, really the benefit of this is that it is a citywide examination of providing for these opportunities. And certainly in light of COVID, issues around food security, and quite honestly, looking at the opportunities to use large areas of land that could be turned over to be supportive to local food production within the urban area, I think are all reasons to support this request.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. You're all finished, Councillor Turner?
Yeah, thank you. Happy to support when the time comes.
Okay. Councillor Hopkins?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and I too will be supporting this. I think the fact that we're going to be contemplating citywide is really important. I appreciate the food bank coming forward with this to start their process with the greenhouse. I think it's appropriate, but I think it's really important that it aligns with our urban agricultural strategy, food security becoming even more of an important conversation. But also, we do speak about this in the London plan as well. And so for those reasons, I will be supporting it. And sort of noting, from what I understand, it is only going to relate to industrial and institutional zones. So for that, happy to support it.
Wonderful. Any other comments? Not seeing any. So are you making a motion, Councillor Turner?
Yes, but I'm not quite sure how to word it. Essentially, the motion would be in its essence that we support the waiving of application fees associated with any ZBA or OPA required to make these changes.
So there have been times in the past where the city has waived certain fees, and often what happens is the applicant pays the fees and then they're reimbursed. So the clerk has asked that question, if that's the approach that we would want to take, and I guess we could ask staff if that's the approach that they would recommend, but it may need to be coming from the finance area. Mr. Barrett, do you have any thoughts on this?
I apologize. I was trying to unmute. Through you, Madam Chair. No, sorry, I really can't sort of speak to the practice on whether or not the applicant actually pays and then we reimburse. I'm not too sure if the clerk or had information if that's our regular practice.
I think it's just come up in the past. And so what we can do is go ahead with your motion, Councillor Turner. And if it comes up as an issue at council, I'm sure the city treasurer will. Oh, we have the city clerk. Okay, so Ms. Saunders, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe what Ms. Westlake Power is referring to is the fact that the fees are contained in a fees and charges bylaw. In order to waive it, you would need to amend the bylaw. Generally, what the practice has been is, yes, either the applicant would pay it up front and be refunded, or council could direct the staff to take a city initiative application review process. So it would be initiated by the city without a fee being charged.
Is that the one where Mr. Barrett said it would take longer to do it that way?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm not sure that it would take longer. It's just the recommendation to council would be that that planning staff be directed to initiate an application.
Right. I know. I meant by taking longer, I meant for the applications because the food bank has an application ready to submit. And so we were hoping to proactively waive the fee. I think Mr. Barrett made a comment earlier about if it's initiated from the city's end, it may take longer for the applicant to be able to submit their application.
Through you, Madam Chair, I will leave that up to Mr. Barrett. He would know better than I.
To you, Madam Chair, it was just our issue as a city initiated file. My sense is that we would be the ones that would be having to do the application, to make the application. However, if what the clerk is suggesting is that it's as a city initiated file, we're making the application on their behalf, and that in fact for want of a better term, the legwork is still being done as contemplated now by the food bank, and essentially it's the food bank's application that we're initiating on their behalf. If that works, and if that's what that would mean, then certainly then it wouldn't be an issue of timing.
I'm going to go to Councillor Turner.
Thank you. That sounds like probably the best way to go about it. Perhaps the recommendation is that we ask staff to propose the best way forward. We at council we can take a look at, and I think between now and then, if there's a way of being able to do that through our bylaws and finagle through things, I think that's probably the most appropriate way. The intent of the motion is that we were able to move forward this zoning bylaw amendment in the OPA in an appropriate fashion that doesn't throw it on to Mr. Barrett's side of the house for adding to the work plan and then having to be processed it and started initially. I think it sounds like Mr. Barrett is proposing exactly what I would think would be the appropriate routes forward on this.
I'm going to go to the city clerk again.
Through Madam Chair, the recommendation could be to direct staff to process a city initiated application based on the information submitted by the food bank or the application submitted by the food bank. That way, that would help Mr. Barrett with his concerns about speeding the process up.
Does that sound good, Mr. Barrett?
It sounds good to me. I think we all know what it is that we're doing, which is we'll be working with the applicant on their behalf to bring the application forward. The issue is merely one of minimizing the cost.
Excellent, thank you. Any other comments or questions? I just want to say, good job I see Councillor Van Hulst. And the city clerk still has your hand up. If you want to speak, Madam Clerk, we'll go to you first. She put her hand up. Oh, Councillor Van Holst, you're up.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and just my thanks to the committee for pushing this forward. It's nice to see that we're almost at every turn and opportunity. We actually make good on our plans to advance this urban agriculture strategy, and that's largely because of the work of your committee. So I'm very appreciative. Thank you.
On behalf of the committee, thank you, Councillor Van Holst. Mr. Mayor.
Well, Chair, since we're in the thanking mood, and I think deservedly so, let's also recall the great folks from the food bank and their staff and volunteers who, frankly, have helped our community through some of the toughest economic times as a result of the pandemic. And they are an integral part of what it is that we do. So I want to extend my deepest and sincere thanks to them as well.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I too would like to thank the food bank for bringing this forward. Thank staff for being so accommodating to make this go through. Thank the committee, the mayor. To you, Mr. Mayor, one of your initiatives that you started very early on during the COVID-19 crisis was a social impact working group committee with stakeholders from the community. I would say that this, going forward with this fits right in with that working group and the things that you were trying to accomplish to respond to COVID, but this is much bigger than COVID and much longer term. So congratulations to everybody. Thanks for all your hard work. We have a motion on the floor, and if the committee's okay, I would like to second that. Great, thank you. And any last minute comments coming from committee or anybody? No, so I'll call the vote. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Final item is 4.3, and there were a couple of communications received from the Silverleaf community. And I will go to Councillor Hopkins since this is in her ward.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know we've got two requests here. One is for a reconsideration and the other one is for a delegation request as well. Speaking to the reconsideration, I will not be supporting the reconsideration. I would suggest we just receive that. To me, I did not support the changes to not incorporating a second sidewalk. I would like to just, the implications of that I think are greater. So I will not be supporting the reconsideration. Councillor Turner.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm not willing to accept the delegation request at this time. We heard the delegation last time. But that said, they raise a new issue in here, and I think that's appropriate for us to consider. And it's a question of parking restrictions on one side of the street. They had filed a petition with us. That petition process typically to consider the parking restrictions being implemented on one side of the street is usually initiated by a neighborhood petition. Perhaps we can refer that petition into the process for parking services to contemplate doing a street survey to do the parking restrictions as we would in normal course. I think the other thing that I had heard was that we normally don't put parking signs in place until the neighborhood has been assumed, but maybe that's something we might look for options. And so perhaps through you, Madam Chair, I could ask staff to see what options there are to put one-sided street parking restrictions in place on the Silverleaf neighborhood or Silver Creek neighborhood, or both.
Okay, I'll go to Mr. Feldberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to Councillor Turner. It's actually coming out of the last council meeting when the decision was made at the time to install the second sidewalk. Part of one of the developer's responsibility through the build out is to ensure right of way free of obstructions. So we've actually been working with the developer to come up with a plan to address some of the issues that have been identified by the residents. And as they suggested, one of those is parking on the single side of the street. At the same time, we've also initiated a conversation through our transportation planning department to start looking at how we might bring a bylaw forward so that we could actually install those no parking signs in the near future.
Wonderful. So it sounds like that's the appropriate course of action, and it's already underway. I'm not sure if any motion is required from us to any other extent. I'm happy to hear staff have been working to address it. I think it's fair that we consider those options. I don't believe that not installing a sidewalk is the solution to that. It sounds quite appropriate that that parking restrictions are the appropriate way to address that. And that's underway. So I would move to receive the communication.
So both two communications, I guess.
Sorry, I forgot to put an S on the end of that.
Thank you. So Councillor Hopkins, you had your hand up as soon as Councillor Turner started speaking, and then I'll go from you to Councillor Van Holst.
So I should have dealt with both requests at the same time, which I didn't. So I do apologize, Madam Chair. I do want to thank staff for the work that they have done since the last planning meeting where we accepted the delegation, and their concerns were met. We received their submission, and staff did follow up with a number of concerns that the community had. They are requesting another delegation, and I would like to make a motion that we receive that delegation at a future planning meeting. I am also asking that city administration be directed to review the concerns outlined in the above communication regarding safety, road mobility, unfettered access to roads by residents, and clear access for service transportation and emergency vehicles, and report back addressing those concerns raised as a companion report to the delegation. So that is my motion. I know I have passed it on to clerks. I am looking for a seconder. The reason I'm bringing forward this motion is that the community has requested a delegation. I am not going to say no to that. I think it's also important that we as a committee and we as a council understand that that there are safety concerns there in the community, and we are asking for a report back from staff on those concerns, and the follow-up to that should be given to us in a report with the delegation. So that is my motion, and I am looking for a seconder.
Okay, so we have two competing motions, and I have Councillor Turner wanted to move to receive the communication. And your motion is different from his, and from what I heard him say earlier, he's not supporting receiving a delegation. So I have Councillor Van Holst on my list, and the mayor just put his hand up as well. So I'll go to Councillor Van Holst, and then I'll go to you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And if I may have a question through you to our staff. In the original plan, was there to be parking on both sides of this street? Is that how it would have been before this issue came up?
Mr. Feldberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Perhaps Mr. Dales might be able to provide a little bit more input, but just to start off, we typically don't address the specific parking needs on some of these larger lot subdivisions early in the process. That comes a little bit later through our transportation and design folks.
Okay, Mr.
Okay,
Bayless.
well.
Do we want to hear from Mr. Bayless if he has a comment to my Councillor Van Holst?
Hi, Madam Chair. It's Garfield Dales through you to respond, and really just further to Mr. Felberg's response. So we would undertake the study at a later stage to look at the parking issues.
Thank you. Councillor Van Holst, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is an interesting item for me. It's one that I would generally vote for a petition, but the arguments made by the committee, this being an unassumed subdivision, seem quite compelling, and so I voted for that. Later on, subsequently, I've gone out to visit the area because it's far from where I live. I've never been there, and it's not even on Google Maps where you could see what it looks like. But when I got there, we did a little experiment and parked a car on either side, and certainly there is no way that a fire truck could get through. So that was one challenge that definitely needs to be addressed. I think by putting parking on only one side of the street is probably a better way to address it than widening the street, which would be the other way to deal with that. However, by doing that, taking parking off one side of the street removes about 28 cars from that neighborhood's capacity. So because the sidewalk, by putting in a sidewalk that wasn't initially intended, you're actually taking a number of, I think there's about 14 driveways that go from 4 cars to 2 cars. And so those would have to be somewhere else.
I just want to correct one thing that you said, Councillor, just so that there's no, so that it's very clear. The sidewalk was always intended. It's not putting in a sidewalk that wasn't intended.
Okay, thank you.
Very clear on that.
So then I guess the point I would have made is that we have an opportunity to provide to make up for that loss in capacity by not putting in the second sidewalk, and that seems like not an unreasonable approach in this case, because what we seem to have is a situation that just didn't really work out the way we wanted, and I don't want the residents to suffer as that. So I'll just let you know, I may at the council meeting move reconsideration, because I'm in a position to do that, but I think the residents do have some important points to make, and I would at that point support Councillor Hopkins' motion, because it does give them an opportunity to speak again and address those. And some of the residents told me that they didn't feel they didn't have the opportunity or weren't aware of the opportunity, or if they knew about it, would have spoken at the last public participation meeting and would like an opportunity. So I think providing that would be a reasonable thing to do. Those are my comments, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Mayor.
Well, thank you, Chair. So we're going through a debate of I'm not sure what now, because we have a motion that was put forward by Councillor Turner. We have right away a motion put forward by Councillor Hopkins, and I'm trying to understand as we get into this, where are we going with this, Chair? I think we need some leadership from you to tell us what it is that we're here to speak about at this very moment, please.
So we have no motion on the floor because nothing's been seconded. We have 2 communications from a community. I can't tell which way my hair goes because I'm backwards in the camera when I see myself. So we have to receive the communications anyway. So Councillor Turner's motion is valid. Not to say that there was any question of that, but there is a motion to receive the communications. That will go forward. Somebody will second that, obviously. Councillor Hopkins would also like to make a motion to ask staff for a report back on the safety concerns that have been raised by the residents, specifically safety concerns about emergency vehicles being able to get through the street. And she would like to move to accept the delegation request at the same time that this report comes back from staff. That's the motion she would like to make. Nobody has seconded that motion either.
So since I still have the floor, I think, Chair, could I ask you, please, could I hear the precise wording of Councillor Turner's motion or suggested motion, please?
Yes, Councillor Turner.
The motion was that the communication and delegation requests be received.
You still have the floor, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. That answered my question. I'm fine for now. Thank you.
So I have a question based on and because it's committee, and I do give a lot of leeway at committee, and then I try to provide leadership when it's necessary. My question is, after hearing the questions that Councillor Turner asked, and we received a response from staff on the activities that are taking place and the work that has been taking place between the developer and city staff to ensure that the road is free of obstruction. My question to staff is, the report back that Councillor Hopkins is asking for, is that, and the work that Councillor Hopkins is asking staff to undertake, is that work already happening right now? What would happen differently, or what in addition to what is already happening will happen based on Councillor Hopkins' motion?
I guess I'll, Madam Chair, it's Garfield Dales. So just as initial response, and then Mr. Feldberg can probably talk more about his work directly with the developer. Just around the issues related to the movement of emergency vehicles and service vehicles and snowplows. So our standards are rooted in our policies, particularly around the Complete Streets design manual, where we do look to balance the needs of all of the users of our roadways and obviously prioritize road safety. So a lot of work was done around those standards and that design manual. That was completed, I believe, in 2018. So that is really the foundation of the standards related to roadway widths for various classes of roadways, and in this case, neighborhood streets.
So is Mr. Feldberg, do you have anything additional to add?
Sure. The only thing I'd want to add is that the right-of-way width was carefully considered through the design of the subdivision. So at the time, we established an 18-meter right-of-way, and this is pretty standard in these types of streets. So we're talking a crescent is one of the streets that where some of the residents live. And then we have a street where you have right in, right out as well. So you're not talking significant traffic. So we usually do a unit count and establish what the right-of-way width is at that point. So we have an 18-meter right-of-way. So with that in mind, the key point really to consider, in addition to all that Mr. Dales is talking about and something that a report would reiterate in regards to design standards, is that even if we were to remove this sidewalk, the travel portion of the road wouldn't change. Essentially what would be occurring is we would have a single loaded road, single-sided sidewalk road, and then the folks without would no longer have the sidewalk, and they'd be able to park in theory across on their entire driveway as opposed to straddling a sidewalk. And that would be the end result of what we do if we remove the sidewalk.
So a follow-up question to that. Right now, there's only one sidewalk on one side of the road. Is that correct, Mr. Feldberg?
That is correct. The developer is actually, subsequent to the last council meeting, they are actually mobilizing their consultants and contractors to start looking at the details, the specific details required in order to install the sidewalks. They have conditions in their subdivision agreement that require that they're installed within a certain amount of time of occupancy, and they're now mobilizing to do that. With some of the shutdowns from COVID, there's some delays in getting contractors and whatnot, so there's a bit of leeway in that, but I've heard that it could be late September when that second sidewalk is installed in front of those occupied homes.
So this issue is being raised right now, even though there's only one sidewalk, and so there's plenty of length in these driveways for cars to park, and yet they're still parking on the road? Is that what's happening right now?
So you have, during the build out of a subdivision, you have to balance trades as well. So there's also a significant amount of construction traffic and activity happening. I would say we're probably somewhere between 15 and 25% built out at this point. So you're going to continue to have those smaller vehicles and on occasion concrete trucks or deliveries coming in. And if you saw the article in CBC, you can see the fire truck having some challenges going out there as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Feldberg. So we have a motion to receive the communications. I think we can deal with that. And then if Councillor Hopkins, you would like to move forward with the second motion, we can talk about that. Mr. Mayor.
I just want to be really clear. Sometimes it's receive and or file and take no action, or it's receive, take no action. I'm not sure why the two can't be combined to one, receive and why we're going through two motions on this. It just seems either superfluous or like I'm trying to understand the logic of it. But Chair, you're going to have to use wisdom to guide me on this.
Councillor Turner.
It helps. My intent was to take no further action, but I didn't want to use that strength of language. I have no desire to relitigate the discussion that's happened. I'm not sure it makes any sense to provide a second delegation request to present the same information. We heard it, we understand it. We understand there's a concern about the traffic width and access. Staff have indicated that they're in the process of identifying the solutions, and that one-sided parking restrictions is the most likely appropriate way to go. That's what's being asked for here. I'm not sure there's anything new to add to the conversation, and I'm not sure what a report back would get us. I think other than what's already happening and just a confirmation of that. So, but perhaps it could be receive the information and request staff to report back when corrective measures have been taken. Something like that.
Okay, and I appreciate that clarity, Councillor Turner. And through you, Chair, that doesn't deal with the issue of the delegation status that is being brought forward by Councillor Hopkins. So if that can all be combined in one, that's probably easy, whether you support that or not, Councillor Turner, that's your call. And if we have to deal with it in two steps, I understand where you want to go, and that is, without speaking for you, but I think you've made it clear, your preference is to receive, and that's the end of it. If that's a motion by itself, I won't support that, as just so you know, but I'll look for Councillor Hopkins' motion and deal with it from there. But I appreciate the spirit of where you're trying to take that. Thank you, Councillor.
So I'll go to Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, committee, for your comments. I see these two submissions as being separate. I am not at all interested in a reconsideration. I have no problem supporting Councillor Turner's motion to receive those submissions. I do want the committee to note that I will be bringing forward a motion regarding the delegation request.
So Councillor Turner, I know you wanted to move receive. What if we allow Councillor Hopkins to incorporate that? Is that, or would you be okay if we allow Councillor Hopkins to incorporate receipt? And then we can do, we're still gonna have to do multiple votes. So at the end of the day,
Madam Chair, if it might help to, I would say, let's do this as two separate processes. One, receive the communications. And then two, let's deal with the delegation request and Councillor Hopkins' motion. I won't be supporting that, but if it's just going to get things moving.
absolutely. And we do this all the time. We talk about how we're gonna do things. So you've moved receiving the communications. I will second that motion and I'll call the vote to just right now receive the communications. So moved by Councillor Turner and seconded by me. I'll call the vote. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
So now I will go to Councillor Hopkins to read out her motion.
Thank you. And this is regarding the delegation request by the community only. And I would like to read out the motion, and I would also like to ask staff for their feedback as well, because I know I'm conscientious about workloads and about how far we're going to go into the weeds here. But my hope for this motion is that we receive the delegation request, their concerns, and that we have a report back so we can understand what staff has done to date and what work will be going forward as well. This is just the beginning of this subdivision. And I think it's really important that we understand not only the concerns, but understand what our policies are and what our staff are doing, working with the community. We have been in touch, myself and staff, the past couple of weeks, addressing their concerns. And that is the intent of this motion, is that we understand as a council what is going on, what the implications are, because I have some concerns here that as a council, we may not really understand what our policies are. And to me, this is a conversation that we most likely will need to have. So my motion is obviously to receive, that's being brought forward, but A, civic administration be directed to review the concerns outlined in the above noted communication regarding safety, road mobility, unfettered access to roads by residents, and clear access for service, transportation, and emergency vehicles, and report back addressing the concerns raised, and that the request for the delegation be granted for a representative. And I just want to pause here for a moment because Councillor Van Holst talked about how the community wants to have an opportunity to talk. They will. It's a delegation 5-minute by a representative of the residents of Silverleaf to speak at a future meeting at Planning and Environment Committee with the staff report noted in A above is brought forward for consideration. It's information, it's an opportunity to hear the concerns and for us to report back on how we are and what we're able to do in addressing those concerns. So I am hoping to get some support with this motion. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And you had asked for staff to comment on your motion for a report. I don't know if it's Mr. Dales or Mr. Feldberg. Do you have any comments to make on Councillor Hopkins' request for a report?
Madam Chair, it's Garfield Dales. Through you, I have no concerns.
Mr. Mayor.
This also would have been interesting the last time this went through, but I'm happy to second the motion.
Okay, you have a mover and a seconder. I just want to say these issues are in every single subdivision. The issue of the streets and we just don't, what happened in this situation is it got caught up in this issue of the sidewalk, in the talk of the sidewalk. But every single subdivision that gets built in this city has issues before they are assumed, before the subdivision is assumed. So it's still in the hands of the developer. They're building out the subdivision. They've got construction trucks in there. The roads often don't get plowed, or sometimes don't get plowed to the same, in the same way that city streets do, that are plowed under city standards and things like that. There are often confusion and complaints from people that have moved in early into a new subdivision before it's assumed, because they're not aware of that process of assumption and the fact that certain things are still under the responsibility of the developer. So the fact that these streets are congested, the fact that there are no parking signs yet installed on the street, the fact that the issue of parking hasn't been addressed at all, it makes sense to development services staff, of course, because they know that this subdivision is not assumed yet. So I'm happy to support the motion of the councillor asking staff to report back on the specific safety concerns of the traffic and the cars and the congestion on the roads, and what can be done to address those concerns to ensure that emergency vehicles have unfettered access to these roads and to these new houses that are being built. I look to committee to see if there are any last minute thoughts or questions or concerns. And I'm not seeing any, so I'll call the vote. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
No.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 3-1.
So that brings us to the deferred matters and additional business. I don't have any, I'm not aware of any. So that brings us to the final item, which is adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Stephen Turner. Sorry, Councillor Turner. We can do, your name is on the screen as Stephen Turner. We can do a hand vote on that. All those in favor? I see every hand in the air, so that means there are none opposed. Thank you, everybody. And thanks to staff. Good night. Thank you. I show some leadership there.